When I first saw the job listing, I thought for sure that it was a scam. Night attendant needed. Historic Arcadian hotel. Must be reliable, detail-oriented, and trustworthy. Pays $500 per shift. The rate sounded unreal. Too good to be true, but too good to pass up. Especially considering the state of my bank account. The email response arrived less than a day after I applied, and they attached a quick questionnaire and then sent a brief email confirming that I had been hired. The day before my first shift, an envelope arrived at my apartment. Inside was a small brass key and a handwritten note. Congratulations and welcome to the Arcadian family. Enclosed is your master key. You'll need this key to let yourself in and access certain parts of the hotel. Enter through the main doors by 10 p.m. for training. Your first shift begins promptly at 11 p.m. Training will be available through the door labeled Staff Only behind the front desk. Please watch all training materials before starting your shift. We appreciate your commitment to rebuilding the legacy of the Arcadian. Curious and admittedly a little nervous, I made my way to the hotel that night. The Arcadian Hotel was just as I had imagined. The exterior was a fading memory of elegance. It had worn stone walls, tall windows with exterior spotlights that no longer worked, and brass handrails that were way past due for polishing. I glanced at the clock on my phone, 9:45. The hotel's lobby was huge and open with a grand staircase at the center that split off in two directions as it went up. The floor was polished stone that reflected the light from above in dull patches. It looked clean but not new. More like it had been cleaned many times over a long period without ever being replaced or updated. The ceiling was high with old brass light fixtures and chandeliers hanging down. The glass on them was intact but had lost its shine. The walls were covered in patterned wallpaper that looked faded in places, especially near the corners and edges where it had started to age unevenly. The cleanliness was barely masking the smell of mildew. Welcome to the Tower of Terror, I said to myself. The front desk was long and wooden and stretched across the lobby. It was well kept, but worn along the edges where people would have leaned or set things down over the years. Behind it was a small wooden door with a simple sign that read, Staff Only. Inside the staff room, I found a TV set atop a rolling cart and a row of numbered VHS tapes stacked next to it. The first tape had a label on it in looping script. Arcadian Employee Training, 1953. Next to it was another handwritten note with instructions. Watch all tapes in order. Do not skip ahead. I slid the first tape into the VHS player and turned on the TV. The screen flickered, a hum crackled through the speakers, and then it jumped to life. A video came up which looked in rough shape. Clearly a copy of the original 16mm film, but this one looked like a copy of a copy. A cheerful man with a classic transatlantic accent wearing a sharp 1950s suit stood in front of a pristine version of the lobby that I had just walked through.
Ah, hello there. Welcome to the Arcadian family,
He began.
We are delighted to have you on board as a steward of one of New York's finest luxury establishments.
His tone was light, upbeat, but he had a strange way of pausing between each sentence and just a smile.
Let's begin with a few simple procedures to keep our guests safe and happy,
He continued.
Remember, our guests may at times be unique, but they deserve the utmost courtesy and the finest of service. Now please, follow these essential guidelines.
The first few videos went over the basics. Instructions on how to clean, address guests, check-ins and check-outs. when to check the guest log, and where to find supplies. But on the final video, things took a turn for the strange.
Congratulations on making it to the end of your training. Attaboy. Now let's cover a few final essentials to keep our guests smiling and keep you right as rain. Listen close now, these pointers are real important. Rule number 1, if the elevator takes you to the basement, do not be alarmed. Simply close your eyes and stand still until it moves back up. No peeking.
The man chuckled in a practiced, rehearsed way, as though he had been told to laugh but wasn't sure why. My mind tried to make sense of his words. Why close my eyes? Why would the elevator just randomly take me to the basement?
Rule number 2. If you find a guest wandering the halls between 2 and 4 a.m., gently escort them back to their room. Under no circumstances should you allow them near the front doors. Use a firm hand if needed. If they seem upset, simply assure them that it will all be over soon.
The hair on the back of my neck stood up and made me look over my shoulder. All of what would be over? The man's smile remained fixed as he went on with the rules.
Rule number 3. Do not look into the mirrors after midnight. Our mirrors sure are something else. We wouldn't want you to become disoriented. Rule number 4. Every night count all the keys on the board. Make sure that all your keys are accounted for. Most importantly, there should always be 4 keys marked for the 10th floor. If one of those keys is missing, lock up the lobby doors, turn off the lights, and wait behind the front desk until dawn. Do not attempt to look for it.
The 10th floor, I thought. The hotel doesn't even have 10 floors. He proceeded with a few more rules.
Rule number 5. Now listen closely, folks. If a gentleman with a yellow umbrella comes in asking, "Do you have a vacancy?" you must politely reply, "I'm sorry, we have no vacancy." No matter how upset he gets, stay calm and cheerful. That's the way to keep things running smoothly. Rule number 6. Attention night owls. If you find that key 309 is missing, here's what you gotta do. Whip up a ham and cheese sandwich, gather those supplies from the kitchen, and then head on over to room 309 and give a polite knock. Remember, don't look at them. Just hold out that plate and wait until you hear the door close before you step away. You've got it. Rule number 7. Now let's talk about Ronald, our cleaning ace. He waltzes in and says, "I'm here to clean the mess," to which you'll unlock the custodian closet and let Ronald take it away. If he doesn't give you that magic phrase, then simply say, "No cleaning tonight, Ronald." And don't forget to lock the doors tight after he leaves. That's how we keep everything shipshape. Last but not least, rule number 8. Now listen up, friends. It's important that you remember this. Never, and I mean never, enter the management office. If you happen to find the door slightly ajar, just keep on walking and stick to your business. And if you hear any peculiar sounds coming from inside, don't let your curiosity get the better of you. Simply carry on with your tasks. We want to keep everything peachy keen around here.
What the hell? I thought. The next few minutes returned to normalcy. He focused on specifics of the hotel layout, explaining what doors led where and the importance of logging any guest encounters on the shift report. The rules that he had given, though, left me with a bad taste.
That'll conclude our training. You're now ready to head on out there and knock it out of the park. Thank you again for your commitment to the Arcadian legacy.
Finally finished, I switched off the TV. And by then, it was a little after 11 p.m., so I made my way to the front desk to get a feel for my new workspace. The first part of the night was uneventful. The Arcadian was silent except for a soft fluorescent hum. I completed the tasks in the handbook that they had given me. Account for all the keys, straighten the lobby, wipe down the desk. It was eerie being alone in such a big place, but it was manageable. I settled in behind the front desk, scrolling through my phone and waiting for the night to pass by. At around 1:30 in the morning, the front door of the hotel opened. An old man shuffled into the lobby. He wore a faded custodian uniform that looked like it had seen better days, and I could barely make out the name tag reading Ronald as he got closer. He moved slowly, his feet dragging slightly on the worn carpet. I sat up, my mind scrambling to remember the rules from my first encounter with them. I knew that I had to wait for him to say the phrase that would confirm that he was here for his nightly duties. When he finally reached the desk, he looked up at me with weary eyes and said, "I'm here to clean the mess." A wave of relief washed over me as he said it. I quickly unlocked the custodian closet, my hands trembling slightly as I fumbled with the keys. As he pulled out his cart filled with an assortment of cleaning supplies and tools, he glanced at me almost amusingly and asked, "You're new here?" "Yeah, it's my first night." "Any tips?" I replied, eager to learn anything that might ease my nerves. "Oh, stick to the rules and you'll be just fine, kid," he said before wheeling his cart onto the elevator. The elevator doors closed with a quiet thud, leaving me alone again with nothing but the hum. Ronald's words did little to ease my nerves. I was trying to figure out what those rules even mean, and why a hotel would even have rules like that to begin with. When I returned to my desk, I noticed almost immediately a space on the key rack. The key was now missing. The key to room 309. Panic rose in my chest as I rifled through the key rack again, hoping that it was just hiding among the others. "Where the hell did it go?" I muttered to myself, feeling a bead of sweat form on my forehead. I had barely left the desk for more than a couple minutes. Had somebody come in while I was with Ronald, or had I just missed it during my last count? I quickly pulled up my notes, scanning for the rule about the key for room 309. There it was. If key 309 is missing, bring a ham and cheese sandwich to the room and knock. Don't look at them. I sighed, resigning myself to follow the rule. Heading into the kitchen, I was surprised to find it fully stocked, despite the hotel's inactivity. The shelves were lined with canned goods and an impressive amount of fresh ingredients, as if they were prepared for a busy night. I quickly gathered the supplies and assembled a simple ham sandwich. With the plate in hand, I took a deep breath and headed for the elevator. The lights flickered as I pressed the button for the third floor, as though the old hotel was struggling to power both the elevator and the lights at the same time. When the doors opened, I stepped into the hallway and made my way toward room 309. It was so quiet up there that I found myself tiptoeing for some reason, the carpet swallowing what little sound my footsteps made. My heart was pounding by the time that I reached the door. I knocked gently and waited. After a few seconds, I heard movement inside, followed by the slow creak of the door opening. The moment that I heard the door begin to open, I lowered my eyes to the floor. I focused on the green carpet in front of me and on not dropping the plate. A moment later, somebody took a hold of it. I could see only the lower edge of the door and a pair of feet out of the corner of my eye. The plate left my hands, but whoever was standing there didn't immediately close the door. They lingered in the doorway for several seconds. I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, afraid that even a glance upward might be a mistake. The silence stretched on long enough that I started wondering if they were testing me, waiting for me to look at them. Eventually, the door closed with a soft click. I let out a breath that I hadn't realized I had been holding, and I turned back toward the elevator without wasting any time. Inside, I felt a brief sense of relief returning to the front desk and having made it through my first 2 run-ins with the rules without anything going wrong. But it didn't last long. Who was that, and what would have happened if I had looked up? What kind of hotel was this? The questions kept circling in my mind as the elevator descended back toward the lobby. For a moment, I just stared at the floor indicator, not understanding what was going on. And then the rule came back to me, the one from the training video.
If the elevator takes you to the basement, do not be alarmed. Simply close your eyes and stand still until it moves back up. No peeking.
The realization hit me immediately. It was taking me to the basement. No, come on, I screamed as the elevator kept descending. I desperately smashed my hand against the buttons, hitting any floor that would possibly bring me back up. But the elevator didn't stop. Forcing myself to calm down, I remembered the rule and I shut my eyes tightly, clenching my fists at my sides. The elevator dinged and the doors opened, unleashing a rush of cold air and a wet, moldy smell that sent a wave of dread through me. I stood there with my back against the elevator wall, shivering in the cold air. And then I heard something moving. A new smell entered my nose and hit me like a punch to the gut. A putrid smell that filled the air and made me gag despite trying not to move. It was a sickening blend of antiquity and sulfur that seemed to wrap around me, making it hard to breathe. The elevator groaned and I felt it rock slightly, as if something heavy had entered with me. I could feel it, whatever it was, right there in front of me, so close that there was no space left between us. My pulse was racing and my face was wet with tears before I even realized that I was crying. I could feel it staring at me like a predator, silently begging me to open my eyes. What was probably only seconds felt like an eternity of pure horror. And then the elevator chimed and I felt it begin to rise. The slow upward motion lasted only a moment before it stopped with another soft chime. I carefully opened my eyes to find the doors already sliding open, revealing the lobby and the grand staircase just beyond. I ran out of the elevator, wiping tears from my face and heading straight to the front doors, ready to quit on the spot. But as I headed to the doors, I noticed dawn was already breaking outside, and an envelope was sitting on the front desk. I didn't know how the time had passed so quickly, but at the time I didn't care to stick around. I grabbed the envelope and left the hotel, the sunlight feeling like a sweet relief. Hesitantly, I opened the envelope, still sniffling like a child. Inside the envelope was $1,000 cash and a note. Great work on your first shift. As a thank you from management, we have included your pay up front for tomorrow night. If you choose not to return, feel free to keep the money as a courtesy from us, but we hope you do return. You are a valuable addition to the Arcadian Hotel family. Management. At the time, I was fully convinced that I would never return. Back home, though, I paced my small apartment all day, replaying the events of the night and staring at the $1,000 on my coffee table. I wanted to quit. The nightmares and anxiety from that first night were already too much, and something about the place was clearly wrong. But then I thought about my bills, the empty fridge, the weight of my loans pressing in from every direction. Ronald's words looped in my head the whole time. Stick to the rules and you'll be just fine, kid. Maybe I can figure it out, I thought. Maybe I can endure just a little longer, just long enough to make enough to really get ahead. And with the kind of false reassurances that only come in daylight, I decided that I would go back. There was no way whatever I had experienced in the basement was real. My nerves must have gotten the better of me. I'd follow the rules, keep my head down, and keep my eyes on the prize. On my second night, Ronald made his usual appearance, a same dull uniform, same shuffle to the front desk and repeating the right phrase. "I'm here to clean the mess." I tried to stay out of his way and everything seemed calm, until I noticed that key 309 was missing again. Sticking to the rules, I made my way to the kitchen. It was still stocked with fresh ingredients, which I still couldn't wrap my head around. Who's restocking all this stuff? I thought. But telling myself not to ask or care, I made a simple ham and cheese, and then I took the elevator up to the 3rd floor. The ritual continued as usual. I knocked, kept my gaze down, and I waited. The door creaked open, and this time the person lingered in the doorway even longer than before, clearly waiting for me to make eye contact. I held my ground until I heard the door shut slowly. On my way back, I skipped the elevator altogether. No way was I risking a detour to the basement again. I took the stairs instead, counting each floor down, hoping that nothing else would happen. After night 2 ended without any major surprises, I felt a spark of confidence. You see, just follow the rules, take the stairs down, don't overthink it. Maybe this gig was simpler than I thought. And by the time the night 3 rolled around, I showed up feeling a lot more assured and another 500 richer, and convinced that I had the job figured out. A few more nights went by that were mostly uneventful. The only rule that I ran into during that stretch was Ronald showing up to clean. Even without anything like the first night happening again, the nocturnal schedule had my mind in knots. Each night blended into the next until I could barely keep track of what day it was. I wanted to quit, but I had already made more money in a few nights than I did in weeks at any other job that I had worked. But as soon as I settled in for my 6th shift, it became clear that night 6 had other plans for me. Not long after I started my shift, Ronald made his entrance. I felt a bit relieved to see him. There was something reassuring about having somebody else around, even if he wasn't exactly chatty company. But that night, Ronald seemed different. His uniform looked freshly pressed, like he had actually taken care to look sharp, and his usual sluggish walk had turned into a brisk stride. When he reached the desk, he looked at me with a grin and said, "Time to get this place spick and span." I froze. Ronald had always said the same phrase without fail. My mind scrambled, trying to remember what the rules said about this. He kept staring, his grin unwavering, eyes locked on me like he was waiting for something. And then it hit me. "No cleaning needed tonight, Ronald." As soon as I said that, his smile fell and his expression darkened. Through gritted teeth, he repeated his phrase. "It's time to get this place spick and span." With adrenaline beginning to pump through my body and my heart rate increasing, I repeated with a shaky voice, "No cleaning needed tonight, Ronald." It came out sounding more like a question than a statement, but he backed away slowly, staring at me with contempt until he had reached the door. I waited until he was gone and I locked it tight behind him. His strange behavior, his creepy demeanor, wide smile, fresh clothes. What was wrong with him? What's wrong with this whole place for that matter? I thought that I had figured out the job, but now I wasn't so sure. I began to question if I'd really be able to handle whatever else this hotel had in store. The newfound confidence that I had felt was fading fast. That night, I decided it was time to get a better sense of the place. I thought that maybe exploring a bit would help me get a better grasp of it all or provide me with some logical answers. Armed with my master key, I left the desk behind and wandered down the corridors. Being the only person in a giant hotel felt unnatural and uncanny. I passed rows of tarnished brass fixtures and faded wallpaper, and other remnants of luxury that no longer had anybody to impress. On the second floor, I found the ballroom, a huge, echoing space that seemed frozen in time. Dust coated every surface, and a once sparkling chandelier hung above, its crystals now clouded and covered in cobwebs. I ran my hand along the edge of a table covered in a fine layer of dust, probably the first person to have touched it in decades. For a moment, I tried to imagine what the place must have looked like in its heyday. As I continued my tour, I noticed that most rooms unlocked easily with the master key, but a few doors oddly wouldn't budge. I tried the key, jiggling it and pushing, but it was as if these doors were meant to stay closed, resisting every attempt to pry them open. As I moved up to the 7th floor, I passed a particular room, room 713, that made me stop in my tracks. I could hear a soft voice from inside. I froze, straining to listen. The voice was faint but unmistakably frantic. Somebody was in there. As I drew closer to the door, the voice abruptly stopped. My breath caught and I took a step back, every instinct telling me to leave. As I backed away, I heard heavy footsteps stomp up to the door and stop. With my back against the hallway wall, I stood staring at the door. I knew whoever was inside now was looking at me through the peephole. My mind told me to move, but my feet didn't respond right away. I thought that I saw the doorknob twitch, just the faintest movement, as though somebody inside was reaching for it. Nope, I said to myself and hurried down the hall, leaving the floor entirely. I tried later to convince myself that it was my imagination, but I knew what I heard. Either way, I had no desire to stick around and find out. After exploring the 8th floor, I made my way up to the 9th, which looked just like the others, dimly lit and lined with old doors. With not much else to look at, I decided that I had seen enough for one night. The thought of a long journey down the stairs back to the lobby loomed ahead, but it felt like a welcome return to familiarity. As I turned to head toward the stairwell, I caught a glimpse of myself in a mirror mounted on the wall. Looking at myself in the mirror, I couldn't help but notice how tired and beat down I looked. As I was examining myself, almost looking at myself with pity, I saw something else in the mirror. Behind me, down the hall, I saw someone else. A figure standing far behind me at the other end of the hall, peeking at me from around the corner. My body seemed to freeze and withdraw inward, like everything non-essential was being shut down as fear washed over me. I whipped around, but the hallway was empty. I turned back to the mirror, and there it was again. The figure was still there, peeking at me from around the corner. It was too far down the hallway to make out any of its features, but it was unmistakable. In that moment, I remembered the rule. Don't look into any mirrors after midnight. And checking my phone, there it was, 1:23 a.m. I burst through the doors of the stairwell and made my way down the 9 flights of stairs as quickly as I could. Finally, back at my desk, I sank into the chair, my heart still racing and my breath heavy from the frantic dash down the stairs. I decided to stay put for the rest of the night, unwilling to venture out again. The hours crept by slowly, but the rest of the night was thankfully uneventful. The sun was beginning to rise, and with my shift over, I clocked out, a fresh 500 envelope in hand. Relief flooded over me as I thought about the safety of the morning outside and another night successfully in the books. As I was turning to leave, though, I noticed something. An error, a mistake. Key 309 had been missing and I never noticed it. I never brought the guest of room 309 a ham sandwich. Yet with morning breaking and my shift officially over, I shrugged it off, telling myself that it was too late to go back now. When I finally got home, I was exhausted. I collapsed onto my bed, desperate to catch some sleep after the long night at the hotel. But sleep never comes easily after working the night shift. The unnatural hours played tricks on my body, even with blackout curtains pulled tight against the early morning light. I tossed and turned, restless and unable to fully escape the haunting images of the night. The figure in the mirror, Ronald's strange appearance, and the voice in the room. I knew something was seriously unexplainable and unnatural with the place, but I couldn't let go of the money. The job finally allowed me to catch up on bills and start paying down my loans, which was a huge victory amid the growing unease. For the pay, there could be worse jobs than a haunted hotel, I thought. With little sleep accomplished, I begrudgingly pulled myself up and got ready for another shift, bracing myself for whatever the night would throw my way. When I arrived at the hotel for my shift, a note was waiting for me on the desk. We would like to take a moment to address an important matter regarding your recent shift. It has come to our attention that the guest in room 309 did not experience the high level of service that we strive to provide. As you know, adhering to our established rules and protocols is vital for ensuring an exceptional experience for our guests, safeguarding the esteemed reputation of the Arcadian Hotel, and maintaining your own safety. We would like to remind you the importance of following the rules. In light of this, we would urge you to avoid the kitchen at all costs for the next 24 hours. Additionally, we're pleased to announce that the hotel will soon undergo renovations as part of our commitment to restoring the grandeur of the Arcadian Hotel. The Arcadian Hotel will be preparing for a new grand opening in the coming weeks. Thank you for your dedication to the legacy of the Arcadian. Management. As I read through the letter, a surge of anger bubbled within me. It's just a damn ham sandwich, I muttered under my breath. And what did they mean by my safety? Avoid the kitchen, I mean why? A wave of annoyance and confusion washed over me as I replayed the past few nights in my head. I want to quit right there on the spot out of frustration. But every time I was ready to quit, the money made me hang on just a little longer, just enough to really make a difference in my life and finally be ahead. And just as I was stewing in my frustration, Ronald shuffled in back to his usual shabby self. He came in a little earlier than usual, but I didn't think much of it at the time. He moved through the lobby without stopping, and gave me the same line that he always does and went straight toward the custodial closet, like he had somewhere specific to be. I'm here to clean the mess, he said. As Ronald was getting his cleaning supplies ready, I finally worked up the courage to approach him. Hey Ronald, can I ask you something? What was with you last night? You seemed different. And what's the deal with all these rules? What are they really for? At my words, Ronald shot me a sharp look that cut me off, his expression darkening. Listen, kid, he said, his voice low and serious. Don't go looking for answers. Don't ask questions, just do your job and follow the rules. Collect your money and keep your head down. It's for your own good. His eyes darted quickly around the room and I caught a hint of fear in them. He then turned away, whistling a tune, and he went on about his duties. I checked the key rack while he worked. Everything was accounted for. I decided to do it slower now to make it less likely that I'll miss one again. I wrote all the rules down on a notepad. I didn't trust myself to remember them the way that I thought I could. Around 1 a.m, I heard noise coming from the kitchen. It wasn't subtle, something metallic hit the floor hard enough that I looked up from the desk. I was about to stand up before I remembered the note from management. Avoid the kitchen at all costs for the next 24 hours. The sound came again a moment later, louder this time, followed by crashing, like something had been knocked off a counter and dragged across the room. Then there was the sharp break of plates hitting tile, not just one or two, but several in quick succession, like something was tearing through the kitchen without any care for what it was destroying. After a while, it quieted down. It seemed like whatever was ransacking the kitchen tired itself out or finally found what it was looking for. Just after 1 a.m., a man walked into the hotel wearing a Hawaiian shirt, carrying a leather bag in one hand and a yellow umbrella in the other. He paused just inside the entrance, shook the umbrella out over the floor and then closed it and let out a small sigh. "Ooh-wee," he said, glancing around the lobby. "Sure is a soaker out there tonight." The sight of the umbrella brought the rule back into my mind immediately. I reached for my notebook even though I didn't need to. I've started checking it more often now, even when I'm fairly certain that I remember, just to avoid mixing anything up. And sure enough, Rule 5, if a gentleman with a yellow umbrella comes in asking, "Do you have a vacancy?" you must politely reply, "I'm sorry, we have no vacancy." No matter how upset he gets, stay calm and cheerful. I kept the notebook open on the desk as he approached. He set his leather bag down and stopped in front of me, still wearing a friendly expression. "Do you have a vacancy?" he asked. "I'm sorry," I said, keeping myself steady. "We have no vacancy." He nodded slowly like he was processing that and then gave a small laugh. "Oh, come on, son," he said. "Surely you've got something. I don't take up much space, wouldn't even know that I was here." I glanced down at the notebook again and then back up. "I'm sorry," I repeated. "We have no vacancy." He kept smiling, but it started to look more deliberate than before. He leaned slightly closer. "You don't want to send a man back out in weather like this, do you?" He stood back up straight and gave a small chuckle. "Now, one room, please." I repeated the line again, trying my best to sound calm and cheerful despite my growing nervousness. "I'm sorry, we have no vacancy." The friendliness drained out of his face for a moment. Then almost carefully, he lifted the corners of his mouth again. For a second, it looked like we were both standing there following different sets of instructions that didn't quite fit together. He stood at the desk and now tapping his finger. I could tell that he was considering his next words. Before he could speak again, I repeated the phrase again, just like the rules had said. I tried to sound polite, but it came out sounding more sheepish than I intended. "I'm sorry, we have no vacancy." And that was when his expression changed fully. He placed both hands on the counter and looked down, shaking his head. When he looked back up, he wasn't smiling anymore. He looked angry. Angry enough that for a moment I thought he was going to reach behind the desk and grab me. He turned away and knocked over a chair, pushing it hard enough that it scraped across the floor. And then he walked further into the lobby and knocked over one of the small tables near the seating area, sending the lamp on it crashing down. He moved between the furniture as he went, knocking things aside as he passed. His voice raised now as he muttered under his breath. I couldn't make out anything that he was saying, but as he moved through the lobby, I caught fragments of it. "No vacancy, no vacancy," he muttered once, and then a little louder. "That's not how it's supposed to go." He said something else that I didn't catch clearly, something about hospitality and standards. When he finally turned back toward the entrance, he didn't say anything else to me. He just walked out the same way that he came in, still holding the umbrella in his hand, the leather bag hanging low at his side. I waited until the doors shut behind him. The second they closed, I was already out from behind the desk, moving faster than I thought I could. I reached the doors and locked the first bolt and then the second, rechecking both afterward even though I knew I had just locked them. I cleaned the lobby and put all of the furniture the man had knocked over back in its place. I stayed behind the desk for a while without moving much and just watching the front of the lobby and listening to the sound of the air conditioning turning on and off. At some point I stopped paying attention to anything in particular. My head kept dropping forward and I would catch myself, straighten up, and try to stay awake. Eventually, I stopped catching myself. At some point, I woke up, snapping upright with that immediate disorientation where you forget where you are for a second and then it all comes back in pieces. I stayed still for a moment until it settled, and then I wiped my face and sat up straighter behind the desk. The clock read just after 3 a.m. Just a few more hours, I thought. I looked around the lobby to get my bearings again, the desk, the key rack, the front doors. Everything was where it was supposed to be. I did a double take on the keys though when something looked out of place. One of the keys to the 10th floor was missing. Oh shit, I said, getting up too fast and pushing the chair back as I went over to the rack. I checked underneath it first and then along the floor, thinking maybe that it had slipped off or gotten caught somewhere when I was counting them earlier. I went back over the hooks one by one slower this time, actually touching each space to make sure that I wasn't missing it. And then I crouched down and checked under the desk, along the baseboards and even behind the front counter, thinking maybe that it had slipped off or fallen when I wasn't paying attention. I moved out into the lobby next, scanning the floor around the seating area, under the tables and along the edges of the walls, even near the front doors where things usually ended up if they got knocked loose. I checked the rug by the stairs, the space behind the planter, the corners where dust and loose things tended to collect. I kept thinking that I would find it sitting somewhere obvious, and that I would feel stupid for panicking. But it wasn't there. I went back to the desk and pulled the notebook toward me. Rule number 4. Every night, count all the keys on the board. Make sure that all the keys are accounted for. Most importantly, there should always be 4 keys marked for the 10th floor. If one of those keys is missing, lock up the lobby doors, turn off the lights, and wait behind the front desk until dawn. Do not attempt to look for it. I closed my eyes in frustration and slammed the notebook down. Well, that's great, I already looked for it, so now what? I said louder than I meant to, angry at the page in front of me like it was supposed to respond. Alright, this is okay, this is fine, just wait behind the counter, no problem, I said under my breath, trying to pull it back together. I went straight to the lobby lights and shut them off one by one, muttering to myself about being done with this job the whole time that I did. When everything was dark, I used my phone light to make my way back behind the front desk to wait for dawn. I wasn't exactly thrilled to be sitting in the dark, but eventually I settled back in to wait for dawn. My lack of sleep was catching up on me and I began to doze back off. But the sound of the elevator chime made me jump. The red down arrow on the indicator began to pulse and a low hum filled the shaft. Each flash of light cut through the lobby for a moment before disappearing again. I stayed behind the front desk, watching it and realizing that someone was coming down. The elevator beeped again and stopped at the lobby. I didn't wait to see it properly. I ducked down behind the desk so I was out of sight, keeping my head low and my eyes on the floor. The doors opened. I heard them close again after a few seconds and the room returned to darkness. It moved away from the elevator slowly. Its cadence was hard to describe, a mix of dragging and something like stumbling forward, with brief pauses in between. It kept coming, passing the seating area and then moving into the open space in front of the desk. I stayed still behind the counter, but I could hear it getting closer without needing to see it. It stopped directly in front of the desk. For a moment, there was silence, and then I heard it above me on the counter itself. I could hear the front desk creaking and groaning under the weight of it. It reached the edge of the desk above me and stopped. And then something heavy dropped down behind the counter, right next to where I was hiding, landing with a loud, wet thud. A pathetic mix of a gasp and a scream left my mouth. I didn't think about it. I stood up immediately and I ran to the first door that I could find. I reached it, pulled it open, and got inside, and slammed it shut behind me before locking it. I stood with my hands against the door, a mix of fear and a brief sense of safety coming from the locked door between me and whatever that thing was. I looked down at my feet and saw an old green carpet beneath me, worn flat in patches like it had been walked on for years. I realized then that it was a room that I had never been in. I realized then that in my haste, the door that I had chosen was the management office. Rule number 8 immediately came to the front of my mind. In my fear and panic, I had ignored everything else, every rule that I had been carefully following up to that point. I had run on primal instinct. But now that I was behind the door and nothing was immediately chasing me, complex thought returned all at once. Rule number 8. It's important that you remember this. Never, and I mean never, enter the management office. If you happen to find the door slightly ajar, just keep on walking and mind your business. And if you hear any peculiar sounds coming from inside, don't let your curiosity get the better of you. Simply carry on with your tasks. I stood there for a moment, my hand still on the knob, afraid to look, and waiting for something to happen. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I remember thinking that it would not just be nothing. But when nothing came, I slowly turned around. I half expected to see someone or something behind me. Hell, maybe some type of demon, or maybe a room full of the hotel's past victims. Instead, there was only a plain desk pushed against the wall, a dim desk lamp switched on, and a row of surveillance screens mounted above it. The screens showed the lobby, the hallways, the stairwell, the elevator, everywhere. The office was quiet and empty. I stood there trying to understand why a room like this existed. It was strange even seeing screens at all, something so modern and ordinary compared to everything else in the hotel. I stepped forward to get a closer look. The desk had a thick book sitting open on top of it. I looked down at it and started reading. It was a logbook of times and activities, my activities. I flipped through the pages and found all of my nights recorded there. Everything that I had experienced and done. Every instance where I had followed a rule or failed to follow one. Logging the state of the hotel. Situations that felt terrifying and traumatic to me were reduced to short, clinical entries in the logbook. It wasn't just my activities either. As I kept going back through the book, I realized that it had been recording attendance long before me as well. Different names and different shifts. The same kinds of entries repeated with slight variations. My attention shifted forward though to the most recent entries. Yellow umbrella guest enters lobby. Attendant denies vacancy per protocol. Guest escalation begins. Lobby disturbance recorded. Guest exits premises. Front door secured. Attendant falls asleep behind front desk. Attendant wakes. 10th floor key discrepancy detected. Searching for missing key initiated against protocol. Attendant attempts to regain Rule 4 compliance. Lights off, lobby secured. Elevator activation detected. Upper floor guest enters the lobby. Attendant disobeys Rule 4. Abandons instructed position behind the desk. Attendant disobeys Rule 8. Enters management office. The final entry caught my attention, and for a moment I just stared at it. I felt a coldness run through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I remember standing there completely still, unable to look away, with the strange and immediate sense that I wasn't alone. I stood up straight, backing away from the desk. The feeling of being watched wasn't subtle, and it didn't build gradually the way that fear usually does. It was just there, complete, like a conclusion I had arrived at without understanding why or how. In that moment, I made a decision without really thinking it through. I was going to leave. Not walk out carefully, not collect anything, not try to understand what any of it meant. I was going to get out of the office, make it back to the lobby, and go straight for the front doors without stopping for anything. I turned and moved for the door fast now, not allowing myself to look back. I swung it open, expecting that thing to be waiting for me. I readied myself for a mad dash through the dark lobby. But when I swung open the door, the lobby was exactly as it had always been. The lights were on, the air conditioning hummed. Everything looked completely normal. I quickly walked out of the office instead of running, and something in me broke slightly as I crossed back into the space. It was something close to anger mixed with disbelief, betrayal, and exhaustion. The feeling of being pushed past the point where fear had anything useful left to offer. "I'm done," I yelled, my voice echoing loudly in the large space. "You hear me? I'm done. I quit." And I didn't wait for anything after that. I just left the hotel and made my way back to my apartment, looking over my shoulder the whole way and jumping at every sound. When I finally got inside, I was completely drained. I don't remember much after that. I just collapsed and fell asleep. A knock at the door woke me up later. I got up and looked through the people, but all I saw was the end of somebody at the far end of the hallway. I only caught them for a second before they turned the corner and disappeared. I stood there for a moment and then slowly opened the door to find an envelope waiting on the floor. Inside was $500 cash and a final handwritten note. "We would like to take a moment to thank you for your wonderful service here at the Arcadian Hotel. We truly appreciate the effort and care that you've shown during your time with us. Enclosed is your final payment. Don't go spending it all at once. After careful review of recent rule compliance, we regret to inform you that your service to the Arcadian Hotel has come to an end. We will, of course, be moving forward with the selection of a new night attendant to continue upholding our high standards of hospitality. We want to sincerely thank you for your contribution to the Arcadian legacy. And of course, thank you for always remembering that at the Arcadian, hotel matters are private matters, as part of the spirit of good hospitality. Management." There was this ice bucket challenge a few years ago where people would stand and wait for one of their friends to suddenly drop chilling cold water all over their body, and I'm not talking about just regular ordinary bathtub water. I'm talking about water that was nearly at sub-zero or had been taken out of a frozen lake. Something that would automatically send a shock through your body. Going into cryo sleep is like that, except 1,000 times worse. Because the jabbing cold, a pain of the needles entering into your body and then the fluids pumping through your veins feels like you're dying, or at least you want to die, but you can't because you're stuck, trapped in a box where the only hope you have is that the sensation will finally stop and that you can fall asleep, but even in the recesses of your subconscious, you will still feel the pain. When I found out that I was going to be placed in the tube for nearly 6 months to the farthest reaches of Jupiter, I thought that it sounded impossible. As far as I knew, Musk was the only guy around spending billions to get people to Mars, so deep space exploration wasn't even in the cards in our lifetime, or even our children's lifetime, I thought. Turns out that I was wrong. A sharp jolt to my head had told me that I was being woken by the onboard ship's computer, which by all accounts seemed a little too early until I saw the nearby monitor confirm that we had traveled the necessary distance across the stars. And turning over on my side, I spat up some saliva and blood, my body aching from the dormancy. Before I could get another gasp of air out, One of the onboard robotic guards was behind me with a metallic muzzle, placing it over my mouth roughly like I was supposed to be a caged dog. Considering the circumstances behind my confinement back on Earth, I couldn't blame them. But then I saw that I wasn't being given special treatment. The 7 other passengers for this death cruise to the stars were also being shackled and dragged out toward a command center. Once lined up, all of us got a chance to peer out at the beautiful view of Jupiter and the stars beyond. I wished I could appreciate it.
Attention all inmates, we have nearly arrived at our destination, Space Station TXRTS, codenamed the Tartarus. Please listen carefully to the following pre-recorded message from our corporate sponsors.
And the intercom computer announced, and then a strange, grindy anthem played over a projected film of the blonde-haired woman that had first approached me while back in Kingsport.
Cosmonauts, brethren, you stand on the precipice of new discoveries and truths that no other human has ever imagined. When you left Earth, you were only considered refuse, prisoners to be disposed of by countries that couldn't see your potential. Now you arrive in tandem to prove them wrong. Your mission is simple. Document as much as you can concerning the space station. To do so, your new gear is come equipped with microscopic digital sensors which will automatically feed the data of your search back to the craft. Once we have determined that we have sufficient information concerning Tartarus, your life support systems will be cut off and your mission will be accomplished. Do not attempt to run or hack any of your gear, or termination will occur at any given moment.
The video feed cut off, and I swore the prisoner next to me was chuckling beneath the mask. It was humorous in a dark way, given that we had all been promised executions on Earth before the launch. I suppose none of us really assumed that a return trip was going to be possible, but hearing confirmation that our only purpose here was to be living cameras for their campaign, it made me feel angry. I thought that I had come to terms with the fact that I was going to spend the rest of my days in a cell paying for my crimes. But having that taken away to play puppet in space for some rich elites made my blood boil. Next, the computer gave us areas of the station to explore. Mine was labeled as Area D, and the man next to me with the bizarre sense of humor was assigned as my partner. Since we had no ability to speak to one another, I pointed at him and gestured with my hand at the number 2, and then back at myself as number 1. All he did in response was hold up the middle finger and then move toward the first seal where our craft connected to this mysterious station. I had no idea what to expect on the other side, nor any way to voice my concerns with my partner, so the only option was to keep a close but safe distance from each other. As the airlock slowly creaked open, and the dark corridors beyond came into view. Inside my helmet, a stream of data began to feed its way down in front of my eyes, telling me what the elites had gleaned about this place before our arrival. Codenamed Tartarus Station, so named for the Grecian abyss where the titans of legend were said to be imprisoned by Zeus. This is the first known record of an unknown space orbital of any kind. It is viewed as the first step by our species to contact extraterrestrials. Since its discovery, there has been no indication of any energy signatures or propulsion detected, and satellite imagery has only provided the following details. Size approximately 450 feet. Weight estimated 1.6 million pounds. Shape. The design rivals traditional designs from any known human culture, but popular opinion states that the orbital is similar to the biblical description of angels. Due to this, many suggested that the station initially be named Valkyria. However, the scan soon revealed that it is likely the station has remained unmanned for well over a millennia, which led to the consensus to view it as a prison. a final resting place for whatever species had built it. I couldn't help but think that it was ironic they had chosen to send criminals to such a place, and I wondered how accurate that was for the station's initial purposes. My headlamps kept the corridors illuminated as we had separated from the rest of our team, entering Area D, and I tried my best to make sense of what that purpose might be. Like the idea of being frozen in space, the concept of aliens had been just fantasy to me a week ago. Maybe if I paid more attention in science class about theories relating to this sort of thing, I would know what I was looking at. So many poor choices had led me here, I reflected. It made me wonder what sort of choices this race had made to build this place and then to die out. An alert on my visor told me to stop and allow my built-in camera to take better pictures of some kind of console, and I noticed that there were symbols etched into the display, indications of a language, which I suppose is unsurprising given how sophisticated everything else was. But what did shock me is that a few moments later, my camera feed told me that the computer for our ship had figured out a translation based just on what was there. Analysis indicates this console is a habitat monitor of some kind. Further data of surrounding area needed. My partner grunted for me to shine a light on the larger portion of the room, where we saw what looked like miniature biomes, each self-contained within a hive-like system of metallic pylons. If this was a monitor that was testing the viability of different types of environments for life, perhaps that meant this race had been searching for a new home. The data further revealed that there was a network beneath our feet of intricate wires and equipment that the scans confirmed were once meant to serve as generators. But I doubted anything like that could possibly power up after all this time. Instead of focusing on that query, I decided to follow the nearby corridor to one of the exterior rings for the station, marveling at the design. It appeared that the rings were meant to serve as some sort of perpetual motion, phasing in and out of space around them at rapid speed. It just didn't seem humanly possible, but I had to remind myself that this was a species far beyond our capability. Still, as I climbed one of the rings, I noticed that a lot of the structure reminded me of things that might be found on Earth, which seemed impossible. I've always imagined that the architecture, the way of life, and even ordinary things like doors and windows would be completely different from alien species. Not so here. Maybe that was why our holders were so interested in this place. It wasn't simply about discovery, but exploiting this technology for our own advantage. As a criminal, that was something I could relate to. We are not so different, I thought, as a reminder of complying with our instructions had flashed on my screen. I guess that was enough curiosity, I thought as I began to climb down. And just as I was halfway, I heard the most unusual noise. If you've ever fired up an old pickup truck after it's been sitting there for a few months, it was a similar sound except 1,000 times louder. And then the entire ring began to move. It happened so quickly that I lost my bearings and fell to the ground as the noise grew louder. Thanks to the low gravity, the fall didn't cause any injury. As I recovered, I saw the rings move faster and faster, until their movements were so quick that I couldn't even be sure what I was looking at. And then I heard the noise from the habitats, and I looked to see that they had activated. Somehow my partner had found a way to spark a flow of electricity from the grid below our feet, the entire pattern glowing brighter than a Christmas tree. Some other portions of the ship began to pull back and shake, the entire thing humming with life, as it seemed to surge stronger and stronger, soon becoming out of control. All the noise made me want to cover my ears, and then I felt blood begin to trickle out of them. Soon we had another problem on our hands. The habitats had begun to spread apart and reveal what looked like a large engine that was thrumming to life. The readout on my helmet alerted all of us to take cover, but it's not like we had anywhere to run. Instead, I could feel the entire station beginning to shake and vibrate as the rings closed in on the central mass and connected to this engine. As the two massive structures collided, I was sure that it would mean our demise would be swift, all of the station splitting apart the way that an atom does at the moment of such a massive explosion of energy. But instead, the room filled with light, and I found myself being flung across the room like a rag doll. Another astronaut hit the exterior ring and went flying, never to be seen again. Moments later, the space station lurched backward and everything began to come to a halt. My head still felt like it was spinning even after the noise had faded away, and my body felt that it had been crushed by 10 tons of bricks. Everything was painful, but I knew something strange and momentous had just happened, so I found the strength to move. When I got over toward the exterior of the viewport, I saw that we were no longer anywhere near Jupiter, nor any stars that I recognized, and the data on my screen was now a dead feed, making me wonder if we had lost the transmissions from the shuttle. At the same moment, another strange noise occurred, and it was accomplished by flashing lights which I took to mean a warning. Rushing to the other side of the corridor alongside my partner, I saw that our facility was now hurtling toward a new planet at rapid speed. We were going to be experiencing a crash landing. This time I knew that the only way to survive would be to take shelter. I began to climb the honeycomb grid, and getting inside one of the many habitats and sealed it up even as the atmosphere hit the station. Everything around me began to ignite with fire from the chemicals in the environment, and I closed my eyes for the moment of impact. Nothing could have properly prepared me for such a situation, but as the rock and dust and debris crashed all around me, I kept telling myself that I would find a way to survive, and somehow I did. When things had finally settled, the habitat that I had locked myself in had broken from the network and rolled out of the crash site, leaving me to be tangled in a mess of metal and alien foliage. Immediately, I started to kick apart my cage, falling down to the solid ground below and coughing as I tried to recalibrate my entire body. Somewhere close by, I heard a shout of praise and laughter, and then I saw my partner standing near to the edge of the corroded window to the station, his muzzle somehow broken off by the crash. That was intense," he screamed. Two things ran through my mind. First, that he now had the ability to free me, and second, that the planet had breathable oxygen. We were very fortunate. I motioned for him to get my muzzle off, but before he did, we heard noises from under the rubble. A few moments later, we had isolated them and found 3 other survivors, 2 women and another man, and the others of our skeleton crew were nowhere to be found. Over the next half hour, we pushed out of the jungle overgrowth into a spacious valley, and it was there that my partner finally agreed to get our muzzles off. "The fresh air, wow," the woman next to me hollered. Even after it was off my mouth, I found myself still in silence. I was in awe of our surroundings. The valley spread out in all directions with rivers, forests, and vegetation. It was like a depiction of paradise. I explained as I began to settle into the concept that something good could come out of this. "We're quite likely outside the known Milky Way," the second woman, a black girl named Kayla, commented as we started back toward the ruined station. "Without any means of communication with our shuttle, that means that our kill command can't transmit properly. We're free," she announced. It was tough coming to terms with the reality at first, maybe because I wasn't sure what would happen next. Would we live here now? For how long? Was returning to Earth even possible? And would we want to return if we had the opportunity? None of those questions could be answered right then and there. So Kayla and the senior of our group, Thomas, made camp near the debris. and we all got to know each other a little bit better. Okay, before we make introductions, I want one thing clear. This shall be tabula rasa, a clean slate. We're not going to discuss any crimes that led us to be incarcerated, only our values and what identifies us. I think it's only fair we take the chance to build something new here. Thomas told us. Oh, what do you think that means? Are you saying that we start a whole new life here? Ram, the younger woman, asked. Miguel, the man that had almost died from the entry crash, commented that it was quite likely that no rescue would ever come for us. Oh, Earth is just a distant memory now. For all intents and purposes, we are going to make a colony here, I guess. The man that I had once been partners with, who called himself Zero, chuckled. What's so funny? Kayla asked. Well, if this little new world order is going to be successful, one thing is clear. Somebody's going to have to start shacking up with somebody else. So how do we decide who gets to become lovebirds? Do we draw straws? The uncomfortable silence that followed told me that nobody else had considered that, but it was a valid point. I think we can't make any sort of big decision until we understand more about this world, Thomas told him. It was clear that he felt that he needed to be a leader, perhaps because of his age. So that night, we lay beneath the stars and agreed to remain closer to the debris as we begin to explore the area and learn what we can about the flora and fauna. A whole new world, ours for the taking, I thought, as the night finally allowed me to settle. For the first time since being out here amid the stars, I felt like I could hope again. We chose to expand from the debris of Tartarus after that first night, using what we could from the wreckage as makeshift weapons and cutting down the foliage until we arrived at a wide open field with nothing but green grass and a few trees to see for miles. This place is beautiful, Kayla commented with a whistle. Zero dropped his weapon and let the midday breeze give him a chance to smell the air. Question is, can we live here? He muttered. I'd been wondering the same thing. Our hope of survival depended on finding food, animals, and water. We were lucky to have breathing air, but the chances of not surviving were exponentially higher than making it to see another day. Let's try and have a little faith. It's a miracle that we even made it this far, right? I commented as we started to move again. Miguel had spotted what he thought might be an orchard of some kind. As we got closer and the horizon became clearer, I realized that it was a massive, overgrown garden of trees and flowers, all intertwined together with what looks like metal and vines. And do you suppose the aliens that built that craft came from here, and the Tartarus was their escape to a new world? Miguel wondered. And Thomas cut through the thick layer of weeds that covered one tree and found what looked like prickly pears. Oh, we can wonder about that another day. I think this should be safe to eat. He commented and gestured towards the other fruits nearby. It was a vast field of different kinds, all of which seemed to mostly be rotting except for the ones that he had picked. This ecosystem is so bizarre, the second woman, who I learned was named Blair, had commented as we started a fire and I watched the sky darken. This place feels so empty too, though. I think that we might be the only living things here, I said. And just then we heard something from amid the foliage and I grabbed my scrap metal to defend the others. Zero emerged with his trousers down from taking a piss and remarked, I think you all ought to see this. Amid the dense forest, he found a metallic object, large and impaled in one tree. Its strange, twisted blade causing the tree to give off an ethereal glow, and to pulse the way that a heart might. Amid the roots of the tree I saw what looked like scars, and as I got closer I realized that they were symbols, resembling the ones that we had seen on the space station. It looks like your theory was right, kid. So much about this feels so surreal, and yet so familiar. Kayla admitted as we chose to set up camp near the glowing tree. Something about its foliage and fruit seemed different than the rest, as though it was the core of the network and supplying all else. I've felt that way since we got to the station, really. I know it sounds crazy, but I think these aliens, they might have been connected to our very first ancestors, Thomas remarked. Zero was trying to climb the tree to reach one of the branches that offered the crystalline fruit, and I asked Thomas what he meant, and so he gestured around us before commenting. Oh, it's like Kayla said. This place, it feels like a distant memory, or a shared dream that anyone can recognize. Something deep inside all of us senses a connection to this place. Don't deny that, he said. He was right, but the fact scared me. It seemed impossible. Humans have only just barely started understanding space travel. All of the things that we saw on that station, and even this biologically advanced plant life, it's light years ahead of our current tech, I commented. I'm not trying to say that I fully grasp it either, but I feel certain that this place holds answers to some of our deepest truths, the very origins of our species, he said. Just then, Zero tossed a glowing fruit down to Blair and then one to me. Oh, sounds like mumbo-jumbo to me. I've read my Bible and I don't remember it ever saying God made man and then sent him to Earth, he remarked. Oh, so you're a preacher now, are you? Kayla said with a chuckle as she tried to get a bite of it. The exterior of the fruit was harder than a rock. Oh, I got as far as Genesis, he retorted, which caused a few chuckles. I stared at the fruit, a thought forming as I remembered some of those stories myself. My grandma used to read a book of Bible tales right before bed. The stories of creation and the first sin had always been one of my favorites, so the scriptures stuck in my head. And then God said, let us make mankind in our image. I mumbled as I stood up and looked at the sword-like tree and the overgrowth around us. What's gotten into you? Miguel asked. The Lord took man and placed him in the garden. I responded and pointed at the tree. And from every tree of the garden you should eat, but from the tree in the middle of the garden you must not eat, for in the day you eat from it you will positively perish. Zero laughed aloud. I think you're taking things too serious, man. That crash must have jostled your noggin. No, don't you see? This is the Garden of Eden, I said excitedly as I looked at the fruit. And this must be the tree of life, the one that God sealed off when mankind became sinful. Kayla paused from trying to break apart the fruit. Slow down. Are you really saying you think this is the real Garden of Eden? I mean, we're literally millions of years from Earth. I didn't see it at first, but now, I think it's undeniable. The shared experience of a common ancestry, the familiarity even though none of us have been here. Our theories might be right. This may be where the first man and woman came into existence, I told them. Zero finally broke open the fruit. It looked like a swirling mass of worms that was eating itself over and over again, and it was an even brighter light than the tree. Let's say you're right. If so, then God was actually some alien race. Wait, where's this God now? I didn't have an answer, but none of us were sure what to do now, except Zero. He bit into the worms and let them slither into his mouth. What the heck are you doing? You don't know what that could do, Miguel shouted. No, I'm testing the theory that Adam here just spouted. If this is the tree of life like you claim, that means it'll make me immortal with just one bite. He took his weapon, and before any of us could object, he ran the sharp end of the blade right along his belly. The blood seeped out for a moment as all of us watched and waited to see if he would topple over from shock. But instead, the skin began to seal back almost instantly, the way that you might see in the movies. The wound was gone and there wasn't even a scar. "My goodness," Blair whispered. "So then it's like the cure for cancer, influenza, and the plague all in a single dose?" Kayla asked. "Death itself won't be able to touch us," Thomas said, and then he asked Zero to climb up and get some for the rest of us. A few moments later, we all had one and got to work breaking them apart. Once we were done, all of us had decided to eat together. "On the count of 3, Miguel suggested. And on 3, we devoured that fruit. And then we all took turns, much like Zero did, putting the fruit to the test. It was a bizarre sort of ritual that reminded me of a college frat party that I had been kicked out of once. We kept pushing our limits for the rest of the night, laughing at the newfound power that we had gained. Oh, I wish that moment had also been eternal, because what came after was the real nightmare. Our descent into madness was a gradual one. I wish it was something that I could have seen hints of, but that is not how it spreads. As the days passed, we began to work and create a small home for ourselves, which we called New Eden. And eventually we began to create farms and roadways that spread outward from there. Miguel and Blair grew closer as the weeks passed by, working side by side. And I remember the first big milestone was when they announced that they were going to try and have a baby. I imagine that child growing and having children of its own, free of sickness and death, until one day, this whole world was filled with perfection. If anything was going to be a utopia, it would be the one that we were now making. Over the next week, however, Blair experienced the early stages of pregnancy, morning sickness and dizziness, and even had difficulty moving around. And then in the second week, I realized that she had begun to show signs of a bulging stomach, something that ordinarily wouldn't happen until the 3rd trimester. "We need equipment to figure out what's happening. Do you suppose anything on the Tartarus might be of use?" Thomas wondered. I didn't have an answer, but Kayla and I agreed to look the next day. And that night, her pain got more severe. The baby inside her was growing at a much faster rate than she could handle. At one point, when her screams woke me, I saw it stretching her skin to its near breaking point. But because she kept healing over and over, it would never actually break through. Kayla gave her something that we had found which seemed to work as a sedative, and it gave me a concerned look as our friend finally fell asleep. And then we both sat in silence and looked at her distressed eyes, and I found myself wondering if this was the price that we would all pay. And the next day, as we searched the debris of the craft, Kayla told me that she was worried too. "She won't be able to die from this, but it'll be a living hell, and that will be far worse. She'll be begging for death," she said as her eyes welled up with tears. "There's gotta be a way to help her. Zero has been scouring further and further to the west of the rivers, near those mountains we thought might house old facilities. If we can't find anything here, I'm sure that he will there," I told her. "Well, what if he doesn't though? What if she's doomed to just keep on experiencing this suffering forever?" I knew that she was also equally worried about her own future, but I stayed quiet. I didn't have the answers anyway. Blair's screams didn't stop until the middle of the night. When I went to go see why, I only discovered more terror. Zero was standing over her with a large rock and had smashed her face in, enough where it would take a few hours for the fruit that we had eaten to make her recover. I couldn't even find a reason to be angry when I saw what her unborn child had done to her body. It was tearing against her skin, trying to break free, and it had even gotten to the point of breaking her back. We have to find a way for it to be free, he said. I'm not proud of what we did, but as we aided in its release, the creature's head finally burst out, its head bulbous and its voice shrill with anger and pain. Dear Lord, I said as Zero disposed of it. The poor beast finally silenced. We've only delayed our problems. Zero wiped sweat and red from his brow, tossing the rock aside. Come with me. There's something that I want you to see. I asked him where we were headed as we left camp, but my guide remained silent, the sun rising over our new colony a few hours later as we left anything that I was familiar with. Most of the world around us was uncultivated soil, and Zero had been searching for something that might give us insight on what went wrong all those ages ago, when our ancestors also ate from the tree. Finally, we arrived at a valley where I saw a structure that was about as tall as the sky itself. It was broken and dismantled, having fallen from the East Canyon above us, but it was still a marvel to behold such an immense skyscraper. I give you babble, or at least, that's what it appears to be anyway, he told me as we got over the next set of rocks. I vaguely recalled the biblical legend. It was a place where supposedly God had mixed up all the languages. Inside the empty tower, we saw endless arrays of computers, machines, and other forms of technology that rivaled anything that we had ever seen, and it too reminded me of the Tartarus. Zero reached one of the terminals that still had an ethereal glow to it and explained, I found it a few days ago. It activated when I shed blood. He paused and cut his hand to let the blood flow into the circuitry, and I watched as a holographic man appeared. He was tall, perhaps at least 9 feet, and had the appearance of a regal officer, but his features looked troubled. And as he spoke in an unknown tongue, Zero said, And this is where I need help. Can't make sense of anything they say. I started checking the computers, using my rudimentary methods from before our arrival to hack into the system. It was a bit archaic, but it worked. Soon the projector started to change its format into a different language, and then another and then another. Finally, we could listen to what it had to say.
Our species has reached its zenith with this new discovery. The one thing that we lacked. The one thing that can give us purpose. The research team of Colony 1 disagrees with these findings, hence the motive behind their attack. However, if we're ever going to leave this place and spread our seed into the universe, then we must be successful,
the man said. It revealed detailed schematics of the Tartarus, which confirmed that this was how our ancestors had made it to the stars.
The ship shall be the ark that saves our species. Once we have traveled the length of a generation, we shall have all connection to this place purged thanks to the virus that we have crafted. Flooding our bodies with this much intense infection will of course have a secondary effect, erasing our immortality.
The next bit of the hologram showed what I could only assume was the dispersal of the virus into the atmosphere as they left the planet. The feed showed every single thing on the planet would be consumed and eventually rot and die.
The apocalypse protocol that we've crafted is a secondary backup in case we fail, to ensure that this never happens again. If anybody else discovers this world and what we did here, this will be their salvation.
The recording ended and it showed the Tartarus again, this time with the different schematics that explained where the supervirus was kept, and Zero commented, And we need to find that. It's the only way to be free of those things that Blair had given birth to. Outside the tower, we heard a howl across the plains, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. That creature was recovered and possibly it was moving from the colony to find us. We had to act fast, The orbital is about a day's journey from here. Let's go, I told him. And we left those ruins and started traveling east, my heart pounding each step of the way as we avoided any trace of the creature. We were nearly in the clear when I heard it moving through the brush. Zero and I began to run, weaving between trees and overgrown fields to reach the orbital. But the creature was faster. It leapt from the trees and latched onto Zero, its fingernails tearing into his back as it pinned him down. I stumbled and held my breath as the gigantic newborn shrieked and attacked him, its misshapen features a testament to what the newborn power had done to human biology. Its misshapen features a testament to what the newfound power had done to human biology. It had to be twice his size and against 4 times as strong. Zero kept fighting though, screaming for me to run as he distracted it. His bones were breaking over and over again as the two danced around the jungle, each trying to overpower the other. The distraction, I knew, wouldn't last forever. With that sort of strength, eventually Zero would be wounded beyond a quick recovery of healing. So I decided to leave him behind as I reached the edge of the jungle and saw the Tartarus off in the distance. I didn't look back as Zero's screams became more intense. And then at last it grew silent, which actually frightened me even more. That meant that Zero was unconscious, and the creature was likely now hunting me. Reaching the station, I pushed myself through the debris and began to search what portions of the place were not destroyed. I saw my old helmet, which we had once considered to be a part of our inmate uniform, and I turned on the headlamp illuminating my steps. As I started to roam, I found my thoughts reflecting on our journey here. We thought that we could escape fate, escape death. This was never freedom at all. We wished that we could have simply perished a long time ago, amid the safety of stars that we recognized. The Tartarus simply had to still have access to the virus, otherwise I wasn't sure what we were going to do. Climbing down an old elevator shaft, I reached a submerged portion of the station and recognized these symbols on the outside to indicate that it was some sort of lab. I dove under the water and pushed myself into the room, adjusting my vision to the cloudy water as I tried to see if anything was intact. I grabbed whatever I could, pushing myself into the next corridor and coming up for air. Placing the vials on the side of the twisted metal, I examined the materials inside each of them. I really only had one way to make sure the virus was actually effective. I realized it taking out a syringe. I couldn't bring back the wrong thing. So I braced myself and plunged it into my thigh. Gasping for air, I felt my heart suddenly stop, and then it felt like it was going to explode. The world didn't stop spinning for a good second, and when it did, I found my entire body was shaking and convulsing. I turned over and began to vomit bile, along with the rest of the worms that I had consumed years ago, and then I simply laid there on the metal, still gasping for air as I struggled to move. My hand cut against the sharp ends of the metal as I got up and pulled back in pain, noticing that the wound did not heal. The injection must have already started to reverse the process of immortality, I thought as I got up on my feet. I searched for another exit, and I found an elevator shaft on my right, tilted and running straight into one of the massive trees. Somewhere above me, I heard the newborn monster scream, and I hastened to climb up and out. Without protection, I'd be dead. Squeezing in between some of the branches and the hole in the wall, I found that I could barely breathe, and then my foot got stuck. I panicked and twisted it, trying to get it loose as I heard the shrieks get louder. And then I saw its silhouette at the top of the elevator, and the gruesome infant started crawling toward me. I barely got my foot out and tumbled down the tree as I heard it leap. My lungs released all of their air as I hit the ground, and I laid there paralyzed in just a moment. The creature stared at me and I started to climb down faster. I grabbed a few rocks and chucked them at the monster as I got on my foot. My body ached and my muscles spasmed, the effects of the virus running its course as I became mortal again. The newborn attacked and we tumbled down a hill. I used my fingers to poke its eyes and the beast reared back and hollered, giving me a chance to run free. I saw a river and I immediately jumped into it. The creature didn't follow, trying to find its way around to where I swam. I wasn't sure why it hesitated, but I used the momentum of the stream to push away, focusing on the rising sun. If I followed this path, I should be only 10 minutes from the camp. The screaming behind me didn't stop, and so I kept my pace and followed a fresh path of destruction, eventually finding Thomas and Kayla and Blair. "What's happening? Where's Zero?" Kayla asked. I showed them the vials to explain what the virus did, making them all quiet as they heard what I had to say. "So this virus, it's death, going back to being mortal?" Thomas asked me carefully. Blair was already eager to take the medicine, her ordeal with the newborn enough to make her desperate to die. They watched as she injected herself and began to convulse the way that I had, and then she gave us all a hug and smiled at me at last. She told me thank you. We watched in silence as she went to the nearest cliff and she hurled herself off of it. There was a sudden finality to our long ordeal when we saw that she had perished, and Thomas bravely said that before we took each other out, we had to make sure that this planet was destroyed. "The apocalypse protocol you mentioned, how do we activate that?" he asked. I told him about the tower and how it likely once served as a means of communication with the station, and so we left the camp immediately to get there. The tower was at least a day away, and I knew that the creature Blair had given birth to was still searching for us, so there wasn't any time for rest. Even though I was the only one in the party that could now get hurt, I became even more vigilant. Nothing else mattered to me except finally getting to destroy this wretched rock. It began to storm as we passed through the first portion of the valley, our sweat and blood staining the air. The predatory newborn was close. When we saw the tower, I insisted that they go ahead. "If I can distract it, you'll have time to activate the tower." The command center was close to the level where the canyon had crushed the skyscraper. "How will you know if we succeed?" Kayla asked. I thought about the video where I saw the destructive power of the bomb detonating across the entire planet, and I promised her that I would know. "Once the signal can be sent out, we will all meet our maker," I told her. And they left me there as I caught my breath again and I waited for the creature to find me. I didn't just sit by though, I set a trap. One of those makeshift holes that you might find to catch a tiger. It would be enough to slow it down, maybe even enough for my friends to get that signal working. There is also an alternative that I'm dreading where everything goes wrong and they can't actually destroy this world. In that case, I'll fling myself into this pit and let nature take its course. And the only way out is death. It was the answer that we were given all along. It just took living forever to recognize how precious living is. The creature came like I knew it would, and I smiled, weapon in hand, as I saw the beacon starting to light up. This is the end for me, but maybe if this message it gets back to somebody else and it's not, I only ask that you send others here to kill us, to put an end to all of this. If not for our sakes, then to prevent this curse from ever spreading. Goodbye. I had only met my employer once, and that was when I first met him. I was fresh out of college back then with a liberal arts degree and no job. In fact, I had been struggling to find a job for months and I had been living in my car to save on money. My daily routine at the time was attending job interviews and doing odd jobs for cash. It was a cycle that I thought I was stuck in without any escape. And then I met him. I first saw him standing outside of the building that I had just finished a job interview in. He was old, lanky, and was wearing a suit that was cleaner and better than mine. As I passed by him, I managed to catch a glimpse at his face and I felt a cold chill run through my spine. Staring back at me with a large grin, as the man gave an unsettling aura that immediately made me uncomfortable. Not wanting to be under his continuous gaze, I decided to quicken my pace and get back to my car. I didn't know why he was staring at me so intently and with such a disturbing smile, but he wanted something from me that he should have called out. Instead, though, he simply remained silent. When I glanced back, I saw him still standing there, still staring at me and still smiling wildly. Looking away and trying to forget what I saw, I tried my best to dismiss him as just another weirdo who didn't have anything better to do. It didn't take long for me to forget about the man and turn my thoughts back towards my recent interview. I felt confident about it and hoped that I would land the job. However, this confidence soon wavered when I remembered the previous a dozen times that I felt the same way and ended up not landing the job. It just seemed that no matter how hard I tried, I was just never the one that they wanted. Eventually, the rest of my walk ended up me moping in despair. As I got closer to my car, though, I was surprised to see a familiar-looking man standing beside it. Staring with intent with each step, I tried to push away the thought that it was the same man from earlier. After all, it could just be another suited man who just happened to be hanging out near my car. It was strange, but not impossible. However, as he turned his face towards me and smiled, I knew for certain that it was the same man from earlier. Feeling my stomach drop at the sight, I suddenly stood there frozen and I stared at him. At that point, my mind couldn't help but wonder how he got there before me. He was clearly standing still behind me earlier, and I didn't notice him go past me when I was walking. So how did he end up in my car before I did? Had I been that distracted in my thoughts? More importantly though, why was he by my car? Did he want something from me? And before I could call out to him and ask him those questions, he suddenly spoke up and approached me. Still unaware of his intentions and finding him dangerous, I slowly backed away. "Looks like you're a person looking for a job," he said, his voice sounding rugged and unassuring. "Yeah, why do you care?" I replied, still slowly backing away with each step that he took. "You got one to offer to me?" "Actually, I do," he said, his smile growing wider, if that was even possible. "How would you like to make $10,000 a month?" $10,000 monthly? I asked in disbelief. "You're joking with me, right?" "Oh no, I'm very much serious," he said. "Of course, you'll have to first pass the test to see if you're qualified, but I think you're perfect for the role." "A test? What kind of test is that?" I asked as I continued to keep my distance from him. At the time, I didn't believe a single word that he was saying, and I was just doing my best to distract him until I could get away. "This test." With that, he suddenly lunged forward and towards me, reaching a speed that I never thought possible from a simple old man like him. Before I could react and get away, The man was suddenly holding my arm with a tight grip. Without a word, he then pulled out a knife from his pocket, the sight of which made me freeze in fear. For a moment, I thought he was going to stab me right in my guts. But instead, he ended up using the knife to make a light cut on the palm of my hand, my blood coating the steel and dripping onto the ground. Watching him with shock and fear, I then saw him raise the knife towards his face before licking the blood that coated it. "Perfect," he said in a satisfied tone. "You're the one we need. You're hired." While I was unable to process what had just happened, he let go of my arm and allowed me to regain my composure. Realizing that I was free from him, I quickly withdrew my arm towards me and prepared to leave quickly. After all that I had witnessed, I thought that the man was insane. Before I could turn around though, the man pulled out an envelope from his coat and handed it to me. I stared at the envelope for a second before looking up at his smiling face. Unsure what I should do, I remained standing there. "Take it," he encouraged me. "Consider this a salary advance." I didn't trust him, yet I still dared to grab the envelope from his hand. Opening it and taking a look inside, I couldn't help but have my eyes grow wide open upon seeing it filled with $100 bills. "I hope that this will help settle your apprehension," he said, seemingly satisfied with my reaction. Turning around, he then began walking away from me and giving me one last instruction as he went. "In your car is another envelope, a larger one this time. A set of instructions are in it, as well as the tools that you'll need for the job. Good luck." And giving one wave of his hand, he then walked off, leaving me dumbstruck. I turned my attention to my palm. I decided to deal with that first as I tried to rationalize what had just happened. Taking a handkerchief, I wiped away the blood before using it to wrap the wound. Once my hand was wrapped, I turned my attention back towards the envelope that he had given me. Taking a look inside once more, I made sure that what I saw earlier was real. True enough, the $100 bills were still in there. Conning them quickly, I soon realized that I had $1,000 right in my hands. Suddenly feeling unsafe being outside with such a large amount, I rushed back towards my car. As I opened the door though, I found a larger envelope on the driver's seat. Looking down at it, I suddenly realized it was likely the other envelope that he was talking about earlier. How he managed to get it inside, I wasn't sure. My car was locked and secure and there didn't seem to be any sign of forced entry. Somehow though, he had managed to do it, and it brought me chills knowing that he could easily get in. Grabbing the envelope, I then got in my car and made sure to lock my doors. I then spilled out its contents on the front passenger seat before sifting everything that came out. The first to catch my attention was a large folded piece of paper, which I soon realized was a map of Nebraska after I laid it open. Studying the map for a few seconds, I soon noticed a red circle marking a random town in the middle of nowhere. Curiously, I focused my attention there, wondering what it could mean. The place where my place of work would be, perhaps. Hoping to find answers, I took a piece of paper that came with the envelope and read through the instructions that I was given. 1. Every time a map is sent, you must go to the town marked with a red circle and arrive at the area within 7 days after receiving the map. 2. Upon approaching the town, stop at least 5 miles outside the red circle marked on the map. Do not go past that. 3. From the position you choose, open the case provided to you. You will find a needle and a quill in there. Use the needle to prick your finger so that it bleeds. 4. Once you are bleeding, take out the quill and soak the tip with your blood. Using the quill, proceed to shade the encircled mark on the map with your blood, taking care not to smear any of your blood outside of the circle. 5. Upon completing these tasks, your payment will be provided to you instantly. 6. Failure to follow these instructions would result in your termination. After reading those instructions, I wasn't sure whether to believe it or not. The tasks were strange and they made no sense to me. Why was I supposed to drive to a town in the middle of nowhere? Why did I need to smear my blood on the map? Couldn't I just do it all from where I was now? All these questions circled in my mind, and I was tempted to ignore all of this and run off with the money that the man already gave me. Then again, what was I to lose? If I followed these rather simple instructions, if luck continued going my way, then I would be paid rather handsomely for doing nothing but driving around and doing some silly tasks. After thinking about it, I eventually made up my mind. With $1,000 in hand and a potential for much more, I decided to head to the Midwest. A few days later, I found myself in a diner in a town just before the one marked on the map. As I sat there looking over the map while having coffee, I wondered what awaited me after I completed the instructions given. It was during this moment, though, that somebody from behind me suddenly spoke, catching me off guard. "Plan to travel there, stranger," the voice said from behind me. Turning around, I saw a man around my age looking down at me with a friendly smile. Confused at his sudden intrusion, though, I gave him a suspicious glare as I wondered if he was working for the suited man to keep an eye on me. Seeing my rather unfriendly look, the man gave a little chuckle. "No, sorry for disturbing you, but I promise I don't mean any harm. I just couldn't help but notice that you have my hometown marked on that map. You see, it's strange to see somebody from out of town heading there to visit." Still remaining suspicious, I quickly folded up the map. "How do you know that I'm not from there too?" I eventually asked them. "Oh, that place is a small town," he said with a friendly smile. "If there was somebody around my age from there, I would know them." Sighing, I shook my head, realizing that I can't make use of the excuse of me being from there. Trying my best to think of a different reason, I ended up awkwardly staring at him for far too long. The man seemed to interpret this as, "Listen, stranger, I didn't mean to put my nose in your personal business," he said apologetically. "I was just a little curious, you know. Anyways, I'll leave you be. I hope you found what you're looking for there." And with that, he left, leaving me feeling a little awkward and embarrassed. Hoping to shake away that feeling, I decided to head out and take on the last stretch of my journey. Arriving a few miles from town just before sunset, I ended up stopping my car at the side of the road and atop a ridge overlooking the town. What I saw while parked there was just what I had expected: a small rural settlement surrounded by farmland. It was quite a peaceful sight, actually. For a moment, I even considered the possibility of settling in such a place if I saved enough money. After a few more seconds of enjoying the view, I quickly grabbed the map and got ready to do the job that I was sent here for. At that point, I still thought what I was doing was silly. However, as long as I get paid, I was going to do it. Unfolding the map and placing it on my lap, I stared at the map and looked at the encircled town. After checking my phone to make sure that I was a good few miles outside the area marked, I then opened the case and pulled out the stainless steel needle in it. Taking a deep breath, I then quickly pricked my left index finger, making sure that it was enough to make me bleed. Once that was done, I then used my free hand to bring out the quill and dip the tip of my bleeding finger. After making sure that enough of my blood had soaked into the quill, I then gently lowered it towards the map and hovered it over the area where the town in front of me was located. Without hesitation, I then began shading the area with my blood, following the instructions carefully and making sure that I didn't spill any outside. When I was sure that I had completely covered the circle, I lifted the quill and stared at my work, and then I began to laugh. What I just did was bizarre and made no real sense at all. It seemed funny at the time, and being there and actually having done it made me think that it was just silly and stupid. I ended up laughing for a whole minute before noticing that the ground was shaking. At first it confused me, as I felt my car swinging gently. Eventually the shaking started to intensify, and I assumed that an earthquake was happening. I wasn't too worried though, since there wasn't anything that could fall on me from where I was parked at. But the feeling of being rocked was not a comfortable sensation. Luckily, the shaking didn't seem to increase more than enough to shake my car. But as I looked in front of me, I saw something that made my heart stop. Rising from the ground around the town were strange pillars, at least a dozen of them. Staring at them with wide eyes, I watched as they rose higher and higher from the ground. As I did, I suddenly realized that they weren't simply pillars. No, they were tentacles, large tentacles that wiggled in all directions. From afar, it reminded me of the tentacles of a squid. However, unlike a normal squid, these tentacles were huge. Based on the nearby houses that stood near one of the tentacles, I would estimate that each one of them were around 100 feet in diameter. They were monstrous and they just kept on rising, pushing up higher than the tallest structures of the town. As the tentacles continued to rise, I began to notice a red glow emitting on the ground around the town. From my vantage point, I watched in amazement as the glowing area seemed to form a perfect circle. Starting out as a strange light, I then noticed that it was emitting heat, as the sensation could be felt even through my car. But that then made me realize, if it felt uncomfortably hot from where I was, that it must have been unbearable from the town. I shook my head and tried to not think about it, as I imagined haunting images of the people there, as if I was being taunted. I suddenly heard screams ringing all around me, as if there were thousands of invisible people being tortured and crying for help and mercy. I don't know how that was happening, but covering my ears didn't seem to work. It was as if the screams of these souls were in my very head. Pained by the sensation, I found myself jumping out of the car thinking that I could escape the noise outside. It was a stupid action and it obviously wouldn't change anything, but the pain was making it difficult for me to think. As I stepped out of the car, I immediately fell onto my knees due to the continued shaking of the ground. Frustrated and overwhelmed, I cried out and begged for the noise to stop, but it never did. Instead, the screams grew louder and louder until they mixed into one haunting noise. Eventually, though, my mind and body managed to acclimate enough to the screaming for me to be able to focus in my surroundings. Despite the pain that I was feeling from the deafening screams, I was able to glance towards town to see that the tentacles had stopped rising and were now protruding at least a mile high from the ground. By then, the shaking of the ground had stopped, and I was able to steadily get back on my feet. Looking up, I stared at the skyscraper-sized tentacles that made me feel puny below it. Watching them wiggle and sway in different directions gave the sensation of both terror and discomfort. It looked so unnatural that there was no doubt in me that it was not from this world. After standing tall over the town for what seemed like an eternity, I watched as the tentacles suddenly tipped down towards the town. Moving in unison, they descended down towards the poor settlement before hitting it with a loud, earth-shaking crash. Bits of houses could be seen flying in all directions, and I could only imagine what those monstrous appendages would do to people that it fell on. Strangely enough, the number of screams that I was hearing suddenly reduced after that. Although I could still hear pained shouts and crying, its loudness was reduced to half. The slight relief this gave me was quickly shattered upon the realization of what that meant. My mind was too clouded by pain to think of it earlier, but not that I was slightly brought to ease. I quickly drew the conclusion that the screams were from the town's inhabitants. If that was the case, though, then the fact that it was lessened meant only one thing. I felt sick in my stomach at the thought of that. However, the horror of what I was witnessing was not over yet. After the tentacles landed on the ground, I watched as they began pushing the whole town down towards the earth. With a force that I thought impossible, it pushed the ground down as it and the houses and the streets began to disappear. Unable to look away, I kept my eyes fixed at what was unfolding, while my mind was tortured by the increasing screams of the few people who remained alive there. Eventually it ended. The tentacles disappeared into the ground and the red glow that encircled the area where the town should be was gone. What was left was an empty expanse of open fields with no structure or people left behind. It was as if nothing had ever existed to begin with. Also gone were the screams. As I found my head had become quiet once more. Yet despite that, I felt more sick than I was earlier. Although I was far from the destruction, the horrors that unfolded left a mark in me, as these sounds of the victim's screams still echoed in my memory. To make things worse, I began to quickly realize that I wasn't just an innocent bystander. As my head began to clear, it soon dawned upon me that I was the one who likely had caused all of that to unfold. I was the one who destroyed that town. I was the one who had killed the thousands of people who lived there. Unable to control myself, I ended up kneeling to the ground once more and puking. I don't know how long I ended up puking and coughing on the ground, but eventually I heard the sound of a car stopping near me, followed by a door opening. Still traumatized and sick from what I had encountered, I paid little notice at first and I continued to stare at the ground. However, once the person who got out of the car approached and spoke, I immediately recognized who it was. "Hey, you okay there, stranger?" a familiar voice said. Immediately looking up, I saw that the man standing there was the same one that I had met at the diner. The same man who said his hometown was the one that I had witnessed being destroyed. Unable to speak, I just ended up staring at him, not sure how to interact. He, however, just gave me the same friendly smile. "Oh wow, it's you again," he said with a chuckle. "Still not much of a chatterbox, I see." Anyways, you okay there? You seemed to be really sick when I first noticed you on the side of the road. Seemingly unable to form words at the time, I simply pointed towards the direction of where the town was. And deep inside, I felt guilty, knowing that I had helped in the destruction of his home. Trying my best to hold my tears down, I wanted to desperately apologize to him. All his family and friends were gone now, and it was all because of me. However, the man simply gave me a confused look as he glanced towards where I was pointing before turning his attention back to me. "Those are the fields you wanted to visit, right?" he asked me. "I still don't know why you want to go there, but if it's that important to you, I won't question it." "Fields?" I asked, confused. No, that was where your hometown was." "My hometown?" he asked before laughing. "I lived here for a long time, stranger, and I can tell you that land there has been an empty field since before I was born. My hometown is farther up from here, say 30 miles further north." None of that made sense to me. At first, I thought that I misunderstood where he said his hometown was earlier, but then I thought that I couldn't have. After all, he saw my map and the name of the town that was encircled there. So why did he claim that he was from a different town? And then a creeping thought entered my mind. Was it because of the same evils that caused the destruction of the town? Had it also twisted and distorted his memory and reality? Realizing that possibility brought a chill down my spine. Silently, I ended up getting on my feet and walking back to my car, ignoring the man's worried calls. I kept on thinking about what I had done and the work that I had agreed to do. What I initially thought was a silly and pointless job, it turned out to be far more destructive and dangerous than I thought. As I sat back in my car and closed the door, I saw the reason why I had agreed to it. Laying there in the front passenger seat was a backpack that I didn't own. Moving my shaky hands to pick it up and place it on my lap, I nervously opened it to see wads of $100 bills in it. Along with them was a small note. It read, "Your next assignment will be sent to you next month. Till then, here's your pay. $9,000 in cash." $9,000. Add the $1,000 that I was given earlier and that makes 10 grand, just as promised. That was the price of all the lives that I had killed. That was the price of all the memories that I had altered, and the result of the simple and horrifying job that I had been hired for. What I was given was blood money, no doubt about it. I felt repulsed, both by it and myself. Putting the bag back on the passenger seat, I gave one glance out to the man who was still standing there and staring at me. I wanted to apologize, to tell him what I had done to him, but I didn't. He would never believe what I would say, and no apology that I gave would ever make up for what I had done. Because of that, I simply looked away and drove off, heading back from where I came from. Although he would never understand it, I felt guilty for what I've done to him in his town. That was 9 months ago. Since then, I've done one job every month for my employer, erasing small towns from different states, terminating the lives of thousands upon thousands, and altering the realities of those who had been fortunate enough to have left their hometowns. I've been paid handsomely for all of this, and now I get to live in a nice home and I no longer have to worry about money. Am I proud of my job? No. In fact, I'm ashamed of what I do, and I'm haunted by the screams of those who I had condemned to hell. Can I leave my job? I don't know. I don't think my employer would let me leave, and I already consider myself lucky that he isn't forcing me to do all of this. I fear that trying to refuse would only make things bad for me. So I've decided to enjoy my compensation and try to live with the guilt as best I can. I have things pretty good after all. Although sometimes I can't help but feel that all of this would bite me in the back someday. Most of the time, I try not to think about it too much. However, once in a while, I do end up being a little curious. After all, he probably doesn't want these towns erased for no reason. If he did though, then that would be a scarier thought, knowing that a man just wanted it done for the heck of it. I don't think that's the case with my employer though. Recently, my curiosity behind the greater meaning behind things grew once again, especially after my most recent excursion. It was supposed to be just like my previous ones, and go to the place, erase it from existence, and receive my money and leave. Now, it sounds simple when I put it that way, but no matter how many times I do it, it never was simple. And despite all the terrors I was constantly hearing and seeing, I never became desensitized. That was a good thing, since it at least made sure that I was still human. A terrible human, but a human nonetheless. On that day though, as I marked my blood on the map and readied myself for what was to come, I was not prepared for what I witnessed. As usual, it began with the trembling of the ground. Standing outside and looking out at the distant town in front of me, I watched and waited for the tentacles to sprout on the ground. To my surprise though, they didn't appear. Instead, large arm-shaped appendages emerged, a dozen of them doing what I was used to seeing the tentacles do. Staring with confusion, I watched as the hands on the end of these arms opened up, its fingers stretching wildly before pointing down towards the village. Just like the tentacles of the past, these arms followed a similar formula to what I had seen before, and they fell down and crushed the village, filling my ears with the screams of the residents. Yet, for the first time since I took the job, my mind was not focused on the victims. Instead, my thoughts were too preoccupied with the arms, as I wondered why they had appeared instead of the tentacles. What did it mean? Did I summon something different this time? If so, what was it? Stuck trying to find answers, I failed to notice the arms push the town down to the ground and disappear. My attention only returned to the unfolding events when I saw something else new occur. As the usual red glow continued to emit in the area where the town was, something new began emerging. Wide, frightened eyes. I backed up from where I stood as a large head began rising in front of me, its surface rough, gray, and scarred. Keeping my eyes on it as it went higher and higher, I noticed patches of scars littering its skin, exposing dark black flesh and even metallic bone in some portions. It was a terrifying sight, and I felt more puny than I ever had in the past during that moment. As the head continued to rise high, it eventually stopped just as the jaw emerged. Laying dormant like that for a few seconds, I then saw its eyes scan the empty fields in front of it, before dropping its attention on me. Unsure of what to do and not wanting to unintentionally provoke the giant in front of me, I simply stared back at it and stood still. Eventually, a loud booming voice echoed in my ears, although I didn't see the giant's mouth open as I heard the voice.
You have done well, my child.
It said with a tone that made my spine shiver.
My power grows stronger because of what you and the others have done.
After that, there was nothing but silence. Looking at the gigantic head in front of me, I then saw it give me a large smile, one that would forever haunt me as the gaps in its teeth seemed to give me a glimpse of an empty void. As it continued to smile at me, the head began to descend down and back into the flowing ground, while the eyes of the giant continued to stay locked on me. Eventually, what could be seen of the creature disappeared, leaving me facing an empty and quiet field. As I stood there, more shocked than I was when I did my first job, I couldn't help but struggle in grappling with what had just occurred. This was clearly no normal job, and no note from the suited man ever hinted anything like that would happen. And when I stumbled back into my car, I noticed the usual bag of money on my front passenger seat, containing the usual $10,000 salary. I could care less about it though, as I sat in the driver's seat and tried my best to comprehend what I just saw. The shock of things though made it difficult, as my heart continued to beat fast. After a while though, I managed to calm myself enough to think straight. Whatever that giant was, it was clearly not a threat to me. At least that's what it seemed. After all, it thanked me for my services and it seemed pleased with what I was doing. So that meant I shouldn't be afraid of it, right? Convincing myself that I was safe as long as I continued my work, I managed to dissipate the fear that was boiling in me ever since that giant had emerged. As I drove off and started the journey back home, I couldn't help but continue to think about what that creature had said, especially on what he meant by others. Was he talking about the suited man? Were there others doing work for my employer that were aiding that creature? For a good while, I thought about that, only to get frustrated when I realized that I'll probably never get an answer. I had no means of contacting the suited man to ask him, and even if I was able to, I doubted that he would freely tell me. Slowly, I began to accept the fact that whatever that thing was would forever be a mystery to me. However, as I stopped by a diner to replenish myself on the way home, I saw something that managed to relight my earlier search for answers. As I was moving to get a seat, I noticed a man sitting near the entrance with a map sprawled on his table. At first, I didn't pay too much attention to him, thinking that he was just another traveler. However, as I passed him, my eyes scanned the map that he had and noticed that he had marked various areas on it, areas that seemed to be in the middle of nowhere. Instead of cities, towns, or tourist sites, he was marking empty fields and random portions of road. This immediately lit something inside me, as I took my seat and kept on thinking about what I had just glimpsed. You see, after every job I did, I always paid respect to the places that I erased by marking them down on the map. Of course, no trace of them remained, but a simple mark with a name was enough to honor them. Seeing the man's map that day, I thought I was looking at the same one that I had made. Immediately, I could only conclude one thing from that. He was just like me. He worked for the suited man too. At least that's what I assumed. Remembering that the giant had mentioned that there were others also helping it, I couldn't help but connect the dots. Was he one of the others that it was talking about? That thought of there being somebody out there with the same job as me both excited and terrified me. For starters, it meant that I was not alone in the job and that there was somebody else who felt the same trouble that I felt from what I did. But then again, it also meant that there were more towns being erased, more people whose lives were altered. That latter thought brought a shudder through me, as I had to shake my head and try not to think about it too much. Desperately, I wanted to go to the man and talk to him. There were so many things that I wanted to ask, from how he dealt with the heavy burden of our job, to whether he had seen the same giant that I saw that day. It wasn't like that wasn't allowed. The rules the suited man gave me never mentioned that I wasn't allowed to talk to others like me. However, as I turned my head to check the man, I was disappointed to see him no longer at his seat. Instead, I noticed that he had already gotten up and was heading for the door. As I watched him, I saw a familiar-looking backpack slung on his back. And that alone was enough to tell me that my theory was right. Deciding not to chase after him, I sat there and hoped that I would encounter him again someday. However, there was something nagging me, something that made me uncomfortable. Recalling the map that I saw, I suddenly felt the urge to compare it to the one that I had. A day later, as soon as I got home, I rushed towards my room and pulled out the personal map that I had to mark the sites of my recent jobs. Laying it down on my bed, I then grabbed a marker and began placing an X on the general areas that I saw marked on the other man's map. I couldn't recall every single area that he had marked, but I recalled just enough to pinpoint the general area pretty decently. Once I had finished plotting down everything that I could remember, I then looked down on the map and glared at it with a dreadful expression. The towns that I erased, combined with the ones that I recalled that the man had charted on his own map, formed the shape of an incomplete pentagram. Based on my estimation, my employer was, more or less, 10 towns away from having it complete. Some years ago, I worked with a tunneling crew. A job like that draws all kinds of people. Sure, it boils down to one guy holding the figurative shovel, but another guy has to point where to dig and yet another's got to get the dirt out. On a larger scale, it can easily get out of hand without proper management. Our crew was working on expanding a subway tunnel. It wasn't anything that we couldn't handle, but my life was in a bit of a mess at the moment. My wife and I just had our first kid, and I was having trouble keeping up with the new lifestyle. My wife was a trooper, but no matter what I did, I always felt like I was doing something wrong. That baby must have been the most patient one ever, as I fumbled with the most basic chores. I would tuck her in too tight or get the temperature on the formula wrong. It was just one mess after another, and that's after working a 10-hour shift. The only thing that I got right was putting her to sleep. I would tuck my hand behind her little head and shush her and sing, and she would go out like a light. Bam, down for the count. That one thing sort of made up for all my other mistakes. I have to thank my mom for the tip someday. It's an old song. It goes a little something like, "Oh, I, foof, my little one." Like a bolt of lightning from last one. You don't, but it's the best you got. It pays well, real well. I can bring all your guys and starting tomorrow. What do you say? I said the only thing that I could. I said yes. It was tough to come home that day. I had been surrounded by this ceaseless vitriol all afternoon. One of the guys had been crying in the porta potty. This was supposed to be a long-term gig, and now we were all on shaky ground. Whatever this new job entailed, it didn't exactly calm us down. But at least we could keep our heads up a little longer. I don't think I did a single thing right that evening. I forgot to wash my hands when I picked up my baby girl, getting her wispy hair a little dirty. I changed her diaper, but I couldn't get the thing to sit right, and I used way too much powder. It was just one thing after another. It wasn't until I sat down to watch the news that I finally got to do the one thing that I was good at, singing her to sleep. One verse and she was out. My wife joined me on the couch, speaking in a hushed voice. She was just as worried as me about the job, but I could tell that she was trying to stay positive. She asked all kinds of questions like what we were doing and for how long and with what people. And I didn't have an answer for any of it. Not unlike the talking heads on the TV. All I could say is that we had a time, a place, and a generous paycheck. "Just be careful," she said, giving me a kiss on the cheek. Doing tunnel work is rough for a number of reasons. In summer, you're melting away in the heat, and in autumn, you're knee-deep in rain. In winter, well, you don't do a lot of digging in the winter. The ground gets frozen and it can mess up the equipment. Depends on the job site, I guess. And we were nearing the end of the season. The last dig of the summer is the one that you finish just before you go on vacation, and my guys had been robbed of theirs. I knew of at least one guy who had to cut his trip to Tallahassee. He wouldn't shut up about it. It was better than having no job at all, but the disappointment was immeasurable. We had been promised stable work for years to come, and now we were fighting for scraps. The location turned out to be a construction site, not a dig site, mind you. There's a difference. The place was roughly the size of a football field, lined with a chain-link fence wrapped in yellow plastic. There were all kinds of construction tools lying around, seemingly abandoned. There was even a bulldozer. We waited for about an hour before someone showed up. There was this one guy with protective glasses and a hard hat, our supposed foreman. He seemed friendly enough, probably somebody a bit further down the career ladder. He came up to us and clapped his hands to get our attention. "Everyone feeling okay?" he asked, throwing his arms out. There was a murmur, but nobody was particularly enthusiastic about the whole thing. We weren't a construction crew. Then again, at that point, we had no idea what kind of crew we were supposed to be. "Oh, we're gonna go through all the details in a bit," he continued. "I just want to say that I know this isn't ideal. We didn't have a choice in the matter. That said, if this works out, we're gonna have a lot more work for you going forward. So let's get started, okay?" That lifted our spirits a little. I saw a couple of nods and the hint of a smile. Maybe things would work out. We walked into the site. He showed us this spot at the far end, right next to a jackhammer. There was a hole about 3 feet deep and 6 feet across. It looked like they had dug it out with shovels by hand. In the middle of the hole, there was a rock formation, like a white spike poking out of the ground. It was roughly the length of my arm. "This is what we found," the foreman said. "This particular mineral is uncommon in this part of the country. It's mainly used in pharmaceuticals." "What's it called?" "A pyrolith. It's used in something called Compound 5. It's life-saving stuff." He went on to explain the process. Essentially, this construction site was found to be littered with pyrolith minerals. The entire site needed to be dug out carefully, and the minerals had to be extracted as a whole. 2 guys were on standby to measure, catalog, and mark down each extracted sample down to the milligram. The tools were oddly specific. For example, we couldn't use jackhammers. We had to slowly work the base of the mineral with a portable water jet cutter. We couldn't touch the minerals without wearing rubber gloves, and we had to put out sprinklers near every active dig spot to suppress mineral dust. That, and there was a gas mask mandate. "It's important that we don't breathe this stuff in," he explained. "You don't want that." And by the end of our first day, we had dug up 5 of those spike things. They were all carefully placed in a vacuum container and sealed with a silicone spray. All that work for what equates to a suitcase of rocks. At the end of our shift, one of the guys had noticed something funny. And technically, we were right next door to our abandoned subway gig. Out through one door and in through another. It took some time to get used to the new setup, and we had to work with a lot of protective gear, and we kept getting soaked by the water jet and sprinklers. Working in that kind of environment gives you all kinds of uncomfortable aches, especially when you need to have a gas mask. The mix of heat and water kept fogging up the glass, sucking the salt from my skin and stinging my eyes. It was exhausting. We usually managed to get somewhere around 6 to 10 pile-lists a day, depending on the weather and how fast we could get to the base of the mineral. And they were all roughly 3 feet down, but a few of them were a bit smaller. Some were a bit bigger. There was one of them that was so tall that it poked out of the ground, but it had turned a metallic gray. And we sent a picture of it to the foreman, and he said that it was a no-go. It's gone bad, he explained. Cut it, leave it, it don't matter. Every night when I came home, I could barely stand. I fell asleep in the shower once, waking only when the water had turned cold. I'd remember to eat, and just because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. It was a strange feeling, and my wife could tell that I wasn't doing all right. I felt bad at not being able to keep up with the housework. But hey, at least I could sing my baby to sleep. That I could do. The fact that the site was so close to our old tunnel job was really strange. It was literally a stone's throw away, but cities can get like that sometimes. It might take 20 to 30 minutes in traffic to get from one street to another, but walking there at a brisk pace, it takes a couple of minutes. I hadn't even thought about it until they had pointed it out. The job was going to take weeks, maybe months, at the pace that we were going. We got the go-ahead to bring in some more guys, but it was hard to find people for a temp job at short notice. I managed to get a hold of 4 more in total, but trying to bring them up to speed was a hassle. I kept getting all these questions that I couldn't answer. For example, why couldn't we just dig up the whole site and then filter out the pile-lith later? And we could have done it all in about a week tops. And yeah, they were right, but we weren't allowed to do that. And what the hell is a pile-lith anyway? After a full week of working with this stuff, we were getting into a sort of rhythm. We split up between surface testing, excavation, cutting, and transport. I was one of the cutters. I stood in a dirt pit with brown water up to my knees, trying not to get my fingers blown off as the drainage pump flopped around. Now I'm good at what I do, but we were working without proper routine and oversight. It was the Wild West. The first accident happened about 8 days into the job. One of the guys, I can't remember his name, got his face dust sprayed with pile-lith. The sprinklers had stopped working and he had to change his filter after a cut. All we saw was how he stepped away, took the mask off, and had a seizure. They had to carry him away and wash the dust off with a hose. He got back to work after a couple of days, but I don't think he was ever the same. There was something off about him. Not quite a 1,000-yard stare, but he would tilt his head up at strange angles every now and then, like he was looking at something behind the clouds. That, and he stopped complaining about his canceled Tallahassee trip. The second accident was one of the other cutters. He had just finished a smaller pile-lith spike when I saw him dip one of his legs down. It looked like he had just stepped wrong, but there was this look of genuine surprise on his face, and then we heard a pop like something exploding. and the guy screamed like a wounded animal. This repetitive shriek over and over as he clutched his leg. And when we got to him, I could see most of his foot and part of his leg had been crushed. Not just a sprain or something, but mangled. You could barely tell there was a foot at the end. It looked like cloth-covered meat. And when they carried him off, he was delirious. I heard him mumble as they shut the ambulance door. Breathing, breathing, breathing. If it had been any other job, we would have called it quits long ago. One workplace accident, it happens. But two on such short notice. No, that doesn't happen. Problem was, it felt like the bigwigs were only one step away from shutting us down all over again. They hounded us with that fact every chance they got. The foreman would slide a comment in about it when he could. Like at the end of every shift, I gave him an update on our progress. He always asked if things had gone smoothly, and whenever I said it did, he would just respond, "Good. Don't know how we could afford keeping this afloat if it didn't." Every damn time. So yeah, we had to make do. It was dirty work for dirty people, but what choice did we have? No one else was hiring, and getting the whole crew to another site on short notice was impossible. You don't spend that kind of money on a whim, and there was no standing contract lurking around the corner. These kinds of jobs take months of planning and contract negotiation. You'll be eating well into your savings long before you see a paycheck. And we kept having trouble with our gear. Not just because things would bend and break, I mean that's normal. Wear and tear is a part of the job. The problem was that we had no idea what kind of supports we were looking at, and most of our equipment was still at the tunnel site. We kept having trouble with the ground shifting. Sometimes when we dug out the pile list, the dirt would collapse. It wasn't bad enough to hurt anyone, but it was frustrating. We had a bunch of sandbags and supports on the old dig site, but we weren't allowed to get them. I kept hearing things around the site. The guy who had inhaled the dust complained about losing his sense of taste. The guy who had had his foot crushed was admitted to psychiatric care. Another guy kept talking about how he found this black door at his apartment complex that he couldn't remember having ever seen before. Just a whole set of strange rumors. Every day felt like walking into a ghost story. Someone had something eerie to say. My first unusual experience was nowhere near as dramatic. I was working the water jet cutter when I accidentally had angled it downward. I left it on a little too long and I cut into the rocks surrounding the mineral. At first I thought that I had hit a sewer line, but that would mean that it was inches from the surface. There was no way that was true, but the ground erupted with this foul black, like fish guts and mineral oil. I got out of there real quick, and the moment that I stepped out of the hole, the dirt collapsed around me, almost like the ground shook a little. On our third week, some people got sick. We thought it was a stomach bug going around, but we figured out the common denominator. Everyone who had gotten sick had regularly eaten dairy products for lunch or breakfast. Turns out on closer inspection that a lot of dairy spoiled around the dig site, like to the point where you could track it by looking at it. If we left a chocolate milk out in the open, the damn thing would be solid white mold before the end of the day. So yeah, no dairy on the dig site. I remember once in the break room, 6 of us were sitting around just chatting, and this one guy joins in with a yogurt. He knows we're not supposed to eat dairy, but he doesn't care anymore. He's staring straight ahead, shoveling spoonfuls into his mouth. I don't need to look to see that it's gone bad. I can smell it. We all can smell it. But he just sits there chewing it down like he doesn't have a care in the world. You can't eat that stuff. someone mumbles, "You get sick." The guy turns his head and licks the container clean. He doesn't even blink. "You don't think what we're doing is sick?" he asks. "You think this is okay? It's a job, calm down." "We're all sick in the head," the guy says, clutching his head. "Parasites." He didn't stay long. After starting a third fight that same day, we had to let him go. And coming home every day was like coming up for air after a long drive. Everything felt brighter and I'd happily do whatever was asked of me. Changing diapers, no problem. Taking out the trash, wonderful. Anything and everything was better than staying another damn minute at the site. Thinking about going back the next day made me feel like a rock in the pit of my stomach. I'd look in the bathroom mirror trying to convince myself to get through one more day. But while I might not be the best at being a homebody, my wife rightfully pointed out that I was doing worse than usual. And she was right, I was. It wasn't a conscious thing, but once I noticed it, I couldn't ignore it. For example, I would put all the dishes into a vertical pile instead of the dishwasher. There was just something hypnotic about arranging them in a pattern. I would sometimes stand in front of the open refrigerator, holding my hands out like I was warming them by a fire. I got to the point where I was scared to be alone with my baby girl. What if I forgot her on the changing table? I couldn't live with myself if she got hurt. And still, we needed the money. Rent was going up, expenses were going up, and we needed a new set of tires for the car. We had already sold off our spare car. We couldn't afford to go without one. It was bad enough that we had to share one. I remember this one night as I was standing by my baby's crib. She was having trouble going back to sleep, and so I leaned in to sing. Problem is, I couldn't remember the words. I had never written them down or anything, so there was this sudden sense of loss in me, like I had forgotten something that was a part of me, instead of just a song. And my girl, oh, she could tell. She was screaming a little heart out, begging me to remember. And I stood there opening and closing my mouth like a fish out of water, trying to explain that the words just weren't there. "I'm sorry," I said, shaking my head. "Oh, I'm so sorry, baby." When she fell asleep that night, it wasn't because she felt safe and cared for. It was exhaustion, just like me. By that time, coming to the site felt like walking into purgatory. One guy is off in the corner hurling his guts out. One guy is crying on a bench. One is lying flat on his back, looking up at the sky. Two guys don't even show up for work. And we barely made progress. What little we get is mostly from what we had started the previous shift. Around lunch, one guy was taking off his protective gear and going to town on a pilot like he was a sick cow with a salt lick. We had to pry him off and send him home. He laughed the whole way. By late afternoon, I was the only one working on this one particular pilot. The damn thing was big enough that I would have trouble lifting it by myself. I had to dig a little deeper than usual to get to the base, and I wasn't paying as much attention as I should have. By the time that I pulled down the water cutter, the cable dislodged something and the entire hole had collapsed, with me in it. I was buried under the dirt. Thank God for all that gear. I was lying face down in the dirt. I could breathe a little thanks to my gas mask in the porous ground, but it was like sucking air through a straw. I barely knew what was up or down. No matter which direction I pushed, it felt like something was pushing back. It's like the ground was trying to absorb me. I wasn't down for long, but in that moment, I felt this intense sense of dread. Not just a claustrophobic panic, but something else. I could imagine myself being stuck there, solidified as a relic in eternal stasis, like watching myself fossilize. All sense of time and passage of the world melted away. I could imagine the years flying by, leaving me helpless. If I had been down there 1,000 years, would I even want to get back up? And by the time they pulled me out, I was screaming. I don't remember, but I was. Apparently, I was begging for them to put me back in the ground. At the end of the day, I was sitting across from one of the machine operators. He was trying to have a glass of water, but he ended up throwing it out. Said it tasted funny. "We gotta do something about the equipment," he said. "We got tens of thousands of dollars still stuck in those tunnels. Hundreds of thousands, maybe. You think they're happy to leave it there? You honestly think they care?" "Well, I care. Hell, I'll take it off their hands if they ain't using it." "You're not suggesting that we steal from the company?" "What company?" He laughed. "Do you even know who we're working for? You know what we're doing. You see any workers' comp going out to the guys who say everything tastes like gasoline?" I shook my head. I didn't like it, but he was right. He took off his hard hat, dropping it on the table. "I say we get our fair share. Split it right down the middle," he said. "You in?" "I'm in." I told my wife that I'd be late the next day. 3 guys volunteered to help pick things up after our shift. There was a fair chance that we wouldn't get anything, but at that point we didn't care. Some of us were desperate to just get a big enough paycheck to cash out and make a run for it. We didn't want to be there anymore. None of us did. We drove down to the old tunnels and prepared ourselves. One guy brought a 2-wheeler, another brought flashlights, and one brought in walkie-talkies. We were going to turn the power on, but it was easy to get lost down there. Half the map wasn't finished, and most of the rooms were dead ends. You could get lost on the best of days, and we were barely functional. We made our way into the tunnels, keeping in touch as we went. It didn't take long for us to find some personal items, but there was quite a bit more to it. We could tell that others had been down there. There were a whole bunch of things that we hadn't seen before. Some of it I could barely understand. For example, there was this one drill that looked like an 8-foot-long syringe on a rail, leading to a hole in the wall. That's not what we were there for, but I couldn't help but raise my eyebrow at that. While the others found some gear, I decided to look a little further in. There was this one space that I had been working in just before we got shut down that I knew had a backpack full of seismic measuring equipment. It didn't take all that long for me to find my way back there. But the backpack was long gone. That figures. That thing alone was at least 25 grand. As I was about to head back to the others, I swept my flashlight across the black door. I don't remember that ever being there. I checked in with the others over the walkie, and they were still trying to dislodge one of the backup drills. I had some time, so I decided to check it out. I stepped inside just as the walkie crackled to life again.
"I got the power. Hold on to something."
Seconds later, there was a hum and a crackle. I swept my flashlight across the room, seeing nothing out of the ordinary. It was a small cube-shaped room with the furthermost wall being pale white dirt. I was there with a light fixture overhead, so I searched the wall for a switch. I found it and turned it on, just to see if there was something that I had missed. The moment the light came on felt like staring into the sun. I hadn't realized how used I had gotten to the dark. That and the light seemed to be some kind of UV. It wasn't just bright, it was warm. The moment that it turned on, I saw the wall shift. Not by much, just a twitch. And dirt don't move like that though. The ground shook as people started calling out on the walkie. Somebody was screaming about a burst water pipe. Another one kept going.
What the hell?
Over and over, I could hear the sound of metal bending and breaking as support snapped, making the tunnels outside crumble. I could hear these blocks of stone, each one heavy enough to crush my car, falling like raindrops. The wall moved, the ground moved. I was standing still, watching solid concrete roll beneath me. The light flickered. A whole section of wall roiled like liquid, only to reveal this enormous glass-like structure. I stepped closer, watching these whirling colors slosh from left to right, up and down, like an organic membrane suspended in gelatin. Blue lines spreading out like the petals of a sunflower. As I step back and take in the whole picture, my breath gets stuck in my throat. The entire wall is the bottom half of an eye, a bright blue eye adjusting to the sudden bright light. I've never felt anything like in that moment. It's like the sky keeps falling over and over, like you're taking a step back even though you're standing still, making the world feel smaller with every breath. I could barely understand it. My legs felt so small that I couldn't feel myself walking. The power cut out. The bright blue pupil disappeared, leaving the outline of the shape lingering in my mind's eye. The sounds of the outside world faded away. I could hear the screaming in the walkie like a distant whisper. I could sense the rumble as the tunnels collapsed. I could feel the weight of the organic slosh as a mass of nerves far larger than me moved at breakneck speed, left to right, displacing the air.
It's coming down.
Somebody cried in the walkie.
Get the hell out. It's all coming down.
But I couldn't move. I looked straight ahead into the darkness and I pushed my hand back towards the door. I couldn't open it. There was a blockage on the outside. The concrete ceiling was starting to crack. My mind pendulumed between sobering fear and a mind-gutting sense of hollowness. I was a father. I was nothing. I was being buried alive. I was pointless. All the while, I hear the surreal sound of something beyond my comprehension of scale starting to move. And I realize that I'm going to die down there. I'm going to be crushed or left to suffocate. And there's this little voice in the back of my head, whispering at me that there's a very real chance I don't come home tonight. That my baby girl isn't going to sleep well ever again. And I just break. I absolutely break. I slam my body against the door, I scream and shout and beat my fists on the metal sheeting. I step back and brace myself, throwing my weight at it, but it doesn't even budge. The voices on the walkie aren't even saying words anymore, having devolved into a panicked screeching. I step away from the door towards the eye. I fumble in the dark, picking up a fistful of concrete to use as a weapon. I move closer, ready to plunge my fist into the surface of the eye when I notice something. I'm stepping in liquid. I didn't hear a water pipe burst, not in here. I fumble for my flashlight. I barely manage to pick it up as my hands keep failing me. But as I turn it on, I realize that there's a thin layer of water lining the floor. An oily kind of salt water. And looking up at the eye, I see that it's leaking at the edges. Tears, maybe. Something in me clicks. The rapid eye movement, the sudden sense of panic and collapse. It dawns on me that I've seen this before. I've seen it a dozen times. It's just like when my baby girl wakes up in the middle of the night looking for her papa. That's all that it is. And I think about that moment when I was buried at the dig site with that sense of the world passing me by. I wouldn't want to wake from that. I wouldn't want to know which of my friends were dead or alive, which family members made it. I wouldn't want to know just how alone I really was. I would rather stay a fossil. Maybe that was it. Maybe that was it the whole time. Maybe we had been cleaning the scalp of something having a really, really bad dream. I turned off my flashlight and stepped a little closer. I could feel this thrumming movement coming from the membrane as nerves contracted, pushing out bucket after bucket of liquid. Meanwhile, I'm closing my eyes and thinking about an imaginary hand placed behind a tender head, fussing about going to sleep. Wispy hair getting caught between my fingers. At that moment, the words returned to me. The lullaby. With a shaky voice, I sing them. A voice in the dark, hoping something impossible can hear me and find comfort. Oh, I, foof, my little one. I sing it again and again and again. I'm imagining that little bundle in my arms and how it settles into a rhythm. How our breathing steadies with mine. A little hand wrapping around my finger and then letting go as the dreams take hold. And after a while, I realize the wall has stopped moving. It's just white dirt. Nothing is moving, collapsing, or breaking. It's just me in a dark room and my workmates trying to move a boulder outside the door. Something's gone back to sleep. When we got out, things had gone completely to shit. Car alarms were going off, streetlights had died. Fire hydrants were pouring into the street. Waiting for us just outside were 2 patrol vehicles, ready to ask us some serious and uncomfortable questions. The whole ordeal was categorized as a localized seismic event. The company decided not to press any charges. They just had us trespassed, but even that would eventually be overturned. You see, they still needed somebody to work the dig site. There were pilots to cut and there was nobody around willing to do it. And honestly, who was more experienced working with this stuff than me and my crew? We had started to get the hang of it. We could make up our own rules. And now that I had an idea of what we were dealing with, I could do it in a way that wouldn't get us all killed. So yeah, we got back to work. I've been doing pilot digs for years now. We figured out a good routine and procedure, allowing us to rotate crew in a way that doesn't get us sent to the hospital. I got about 30 guys working with me. There's not a lot of demand for it, but what demand there is pays very well. I don't think you'll find any Craigslist postings for pilot diggers anytime soon, but we're out there. Sometimes it just looks like a construction site. Sometimes they don't bother trying to hide it. People see a jackhammer and they roll their eyes, hoping that we won't stick around for long. My girl isn't a baby anymore, but in another sense of the word, she absolutely is. I've managed to scrape together a pretty good life for her. I work weekdays along with every second and third weekend of the month. but I get the full first week of the month completely off. Just 2 paid vacation weeks a year though. But the hourly rates are just, I'll admit, I'm a bit spoiled. I could sign off on a new pool and it wouldn't break our budget. But I feel like I had to take a moment to look back at it all. Not just because it was a monumental day of my life, but because it changed something in me. I may be the smallest, most insignificant thing in whatever world this is, but I'm still here. I can still do something. And if I can do that one goddamn thing right, is that not enough reason to do it? I'm thinking, whenever I'm gray and gone, is my girl gonna remember the fancy vacations and the new car smell of our family Hyundai? Or is she gonna remember the times that I sung her to sleep? I don't need an answer. I know it. I feel it. And somewhere deep underground, there is something that feels the same.